Chapter 121. The Lost Eggshell. The Swamplanter Howland Reed was short and thin, wearing a grey, inconspicuous robe. He looked quite ordinary, the kind of person who could not be noticed at a glance in the crowd, but Renly had to pay attention to him. Not only because he stole his dagger, but also because he seemed to be an extraordinary person. When he saw the Swamplanter, he was walking in the corridor of Mager's Holdfast under the guidance of a servant. When he saw him suddenly, Renly subconsciously thought that there was some special magic mark on the dagger, and this person followed the mark to find him. However, despite thinking so, he approached and greeted him without any abnormality. "Long time no see, Lord Howland." "Hello, Lord Renly." The other party returned the greeting, and his expression did not seem strange, which made Renly secretly relieved. Then he asked curiously, "Why is the Lord here?" This question is very normal, because only certain people can enter Mager's Holdfast, such as royal children, such as the relatives of the Lannister family. "I have some knowledge of architecture, and His Majesty Robert invited me to inspect the Red Castle and help customize the renovation plan." This person answered like this, and the Red Castle servant beside him nodded. Renly said oh and was completely relieved, so he lost interest and said, "Then you go first, sir, I have to go back and rest first, and I have to attend the banquet in the evening." He was about to leave after he finished speaking, but the other party suddenly stopped him, and then asked under Renly's strange eyes, "Lord Renly, I heard that you have a black cat." "Yes." Renly nodded. Everyone in the Red Castle knew about this matter, because this black cat was quite famous in the Red Castle, and after Renly's amnesty the news also caused a lot of discussion among bored people. Later, the twins of the Redwine family foolishly ran to the throne room and asked Robert, who was not yet king, for the cat. As a result, they were laughed at by many nobles who were listening. The two little fools were so embarrassed that they gave up. The cat became more famous. "Can I see the cat?" The Swamplanter saw him nod and said hurriedly, "It's very important to me." "What's so important about a cat?" Renly asked curiously. Although he knew that the cat was very unusual, he couldn't imagine how the cat could be related to the Swamplanter. "The cat may be a special species that has disappeared for a long time." The Swamplanter answered seriously, "And I usually like to study the animal species in Westeros, and I hope to observe it up close." "You can fool a 3-year-old child with this." Renly pouted secretly, but on the surface he said regretfully, "It sounds interesting, but it's a pity that I haven't seen the cat for several days. It disappeared." The Swamplanter frowned. "I guess so, or it may have run away to some corner." Renly said, "The cat was originally a wild cat. Stannis said that wild cats are never tamed, so I'm not surprised that it ran away." The other party was a little disappointed when he heard this, but he didn't bother much. Instead, he sighed and said goodbye to him politely. Turning his head to watch his back leave, Renly touched his chin thoughtfully. He didn't lie. Since he left the dungeon, the cat has been missing, and no one knows where it ran away. Renly felt very sorry about this, because it was indeed a very special cat, and it was a pity to lose it. But it was special, but why did this Marshlander look for it? Because of the skin changer? In many folk tales, the North is home to special beings called shapeshifters who can possess animals, and Renly had long suspected that the black cat was possessed by a shapeshifter, which was why he was so smart. He made a random guess in his mind, but it was impossible to figure out the specific situation, and this question was not important among his many questions, so Renly stopped paying attention to it and prepared to continue on his way. As a result, when he turned around, he suddenly saw two sneaky boys looking over here at the corner of the open-air corridor. This made Renly suddenly suspect that his cat was caught by these two naughty kids, so without hesitation, he walked towards them quickly with the two guards behind him. The twins with strange orange hair were startled by this, and they seemed to have not expected that they would be discovered. They quickly retracted their heads to avoid it, but unfortunately Renly had already identified them, so even if the two guys ran back to their rooms, they could not escape Renly's questioning. "Did you steal my cat?" After knocking on the door, there was a questioning voice. The two ugly faces that poked their heads out from behind the door looked at each other and answered in unison, "We didn't steal your cat." "Then why did you run away when you saw me?" Renly asked in disbelief. "You look scary." The tall and strong boy answered carefully, while the short and thin boy said the opposite, "If we don't run, do we have to call you adults?" "We don't want to call you that." "What a ridiculous reason." Renly frowned, a little unconvinced, but it didn't seem like the two guys were lying, so he repeated the question. You really didn't steal my cat? Thieves steal things. The short twins said confidently, if we want to do something, we will rob, not steal. As soon as the voice fell, the big guy poked his brother next to him and whispered in a very subtle voice, don't say that, this guy is now the Lord of Dragonstone, you can't rob him randomly. What are you afraid of? Our father is still the Lord of the Arbor. The short man retorted in a low voice, but then he changed the subject and looked at Renly and said, I heard that you are going to Highgarden to be my grandmother's adopted son? Then we will be a family in the future, and we should be closer, so I don't blame you for wronging us. Do you want to play with us? I don't want to play with idiots. Renly answered seriously, especially two idiots who are ugly, stupid, and look exactly the same. This made the short man's face darken, and he gritted his teeth and glared at the guy in front of him, as if he was about to roll up his sleeves to fight. The big man next to him snorted and said indignantly, you are beautiful, you annoying guy. After that, he closed the door tightly with a bang, which was also a relief for his brother who pretended to fight but didn't move his feet at all. Renly didn't care about being rejected from the door. He relied on his sensitive ears to listen to some noises inside and began to frown and think. They seemed to have nothing to do with the disappearance of the black cat. So where did his cat go? Originally, Renly didn't take it too seriously. But today, when the Marshlander showed up, he thought it was important to find the cat, but there was no clue. Walking absent-mindedly on the way back to his residence, he met the little devil of the Lannister family and greeted him on the way. The other party looked at him a little strangely, which made Renly puzzled again. But he didn't care much. After returning to the room and searching, he didn't find any corner where the cat was hiding, nor did he find any relevant clues. Instead, Renly found that the things he lost were not limited to the cat. There was also a pile of eggshells. A pile of dragon eggshells that he had once wrapped up and locked in a box because he disliked the taste. Chapter 122. As the wedding feast began in the evening, Renly was still thinking about the cat and the dragon eggshell. It was normal for the cat to disappear. After all, it was a moving creature, but something was wrong about the eggshell disappearing. Renly had locked the eggshell in his trash can before. At the same time, in order to prevent someone from opening it without his knowledge, he also learned some tricks from his past memories that he didn't know where to lock. Put a hair on it. This way if someone moves the lock, he will definitely be able to find it. However, when he opened the box before, the hair was still there, but the eggshell inside was missing. Under the triple protection of the lock, the hair, and the door he had stuck upside down, how did that thing disappear? Renly felt that this was a supernatural event, but in addition, the missing cat and the sudden arrival of the people from the glade looking for the cat also made him feel very strange. It was as if something had happened without his knowledge. So, what's going on? With this question lingering in his mind, the black-haired boy absent-mindedly cut the plate of onion cheese pie in front of him with the dagger in his hand without even realizing it. Even the ugly blonde boy sitting next to him, who had been ignoring him, went out of his way to she glanced at him and hesitated to speak, but she opened her mouth several times but nothing came out. The vast throne room was crowded with people. Long tables were spread out in all directions. Servants were busy carrying plates of dishes with different aromas. The nobles were toasting when the king stood up. They all stood up and shouted in response. In an environment where people were drinking and drinking, top singers from all over the 7 countries took turns to stand under the king's banquet table and sing. The sound of music could be heard all around, and the flickering lights shrouded the surroundings, making the atmosphere even more intense. The table where the king sat was in the shadow of the towering iron throne, long enough to seat all the direct members of the families of both parties to the marriage. At this time, Renly was sitting on a chair 3 seats away from the king. Next to him were 2 Lannisters. One is Tyrion, who is the same age as him, and the other is a blonde young man named Gillian. There were noisy sounds all around, and the blonde young man on the left was talking softly to Stannis next to him. With a smile on his face, it was difficult to tell that he had actually been out of words for a long time. Unfortunately, the other party had always been lukewarm. Farther away in the core area, the young king was watching with great interest the male and female acrobatic performances in the open space in front of the table. From time to time, he was talking to the people next to him. What seemed to be vaguely floating in his ears were words such as "reese" and "interesting acrobatics." The newlywed queen sitting next to him maintained a dignified and elegant look with a smile on her face, and her every move amazed many people who were observing her openly or covertly. Of course, due to some widely circulated news before, more people, after observing her, intentionally or unintentionally looked at the side of the king's long table, where a blond man stood guarding quietly in the shadow of the Iron Throne. The figure in white robe has different emotions in his eyes. The initiator doesn't care about these special circumstances at the moment, from the eggshell problem to Rhea, from the black cat problem to himself, and he is still thinking about certain things in the future. The environment at the banquet was quite noisy, but he had encountered so many problems recently that he couldn't help but fall into a trance. But after a while, this kind of thinking was quietly broken by the words of the people next to him. I wonder, Renly. The emotions of the voice coming from beside me seemed a bit complicated, including expectation, entanglement, loss, anxiety. Renly looked sideways, and saw that the very famous little devil in his memory had his facial features tangled together, looking very tangled. What's weird? He asked. In the afternoon, you laughed at them for being ugly. The ugly boy's words made Renly a little surprised, but he still nodded. Yes, what's wrong? You said you don't play with ugly and stupid people. The blonde boy stared at him and said, but why are you playing with me? These words made Renly a little confused, and he didn't understand why this person would ask such questions, but before he could speak, the other person said to himself, I'm uglier than them, and I don't think I'm that smart either. And besides being ugly, I'm also a deformed dwarf. He said, his two colored eyes carefully looking at Renly's facial expression at this time. According to your behavior when talking to those two guys, you should ignore people like me. Then why do you not seem to look down on me at all? Is it because of my family? But it doesn't look like. Many people are very polite to me because of my family, but they don't look like you, so what's the reason? This sensitive and fragile boy with wrinkled features was staring at Renly with a frown, as if he was trying hard to think about a question he didn't understand. I've been thinking about it all afternoon and haven't figured it out yet. Can you tell me why? So why are you struggling with this issue? Renly was secretly surprised, but he simply couldn't figure out many of his questions, so he stopped thinking about them for the time being. After thinking about it, he said, you are a bit ugly, but I don't think you are stupid. His words made the boy scratch his head with a strange look on his face. You think I'm smart? No. Renly shook his head and said under the stunned expression, I think you will be very smart in the future. This was basically telling the truth, but unfortunately the other party couldn't understand what he said, and felt very confused after hearing what he said. Seeing this, Renly explained, you like to read books, and you can still read them. This is very important, because even those adults rarely like to read books. Bachelors also like to read books. Tyrion shook his head after hearing this is not an advantage. It's really not a big deal to like reading. Renly replied, but a boy who can take the initiative to read without being pushed is quite rare in my opinion. As he spoke, he turned around, used a dagger to cut a piece of food that was unclear whether it was peacock meat or heron meat, and stuffed it into his mouth. He said slightly vaguely, so back to the previous question, why do I treat you differently from others? Because I'm optimistic about your future. That's all. The other party asked blankly, how optimistic are you about the future of a dwarf? What else? What else could there be? Renly shrugged. Be optimistic, Tyrion. You actually have many advantages, but you don't know it, or you know it but you still lack confidence. I guess this is because of your appearance, but I think a person's appearance it doesn't affect who he will become in the future, only the direction of his efforts and choices. After he finished speaking, he ignored the other person's expression, lowered his head, picked up a bowl of broth, and started drinking. However, when he saw something coming into view out of the corner of his eye, the boy couldn't help but swallow. Narrow your eyes. It was a grey, moving chicken leg rolling on the ground. Chapter 123. There seemed to be thousands of people participating in the banquet in the wide throne hall, but the long table under the Iron Throne at the innermost end could still clearly see most of the situation here. This was not only because the surface of this table was higher than other places in the hall, but also because there was a large enough open space in the center of the banquet hall. Some acrobats or singers took turns to perform in the open space, and soon many noble men and women would jump in and dance. However, just as two short dwarfs dressed as clowns were performing a funny dance here, a grey chicken leg suddenly rolled out from the dense tables and chairs and fled in panic towards the depths of the hall. Following closely behind was a dog. It was a white-haired pet dog with long ears. Its ears jumped when it ran on its short limbs, and it barked at the same time, but the sound was drowned in the greater noise of the banquet environment and seemed very weak. At the edge of the open space, a middle-aged nobleman who was sitting there and chatting with someone beside him was the first to notice the white dog running past him, and then he saw what it was chasing, and he was stunned on the spot. Several people who heard the noise and looked over also screamed in surprise, and an old man with a crow emblem embroidered on his chest rubbed his eyes in disbelief, muttering in confusion. "What is that?" No one answered his question, because the running puppy had already rushed to the two clowns. One of them was a dwarf with ketchup on his face, holding a pig bladder and dancing on one leg. He was spinning around, but was scratched by the dog and fell to the ground with a plop, uttering a cry of pain. Many viewers who didn't know what was going on thought it was an entertainment show prepared by the dwarfs, and laughed loudly at it, but some people who found out the truth were either confused or terrified, or stunned. Duke Tyrell of the Reach, who was near the chief seat, was originally chatting and laughing with the Duke of the North beside him, but suddenly saw a dusty thing jumping onto his table, and then it jumped into a bowl of bacon and mushroom soup on the table, and the boiling soup splashed all over Duke Tyrell. Although this situation would usually make him look gloomy, he swallowed his saliva unconsciously and stared blankly at the thing rolling in the soup bowl with an increasingly terrified look. But before he could shout out, the thing that should have been dead suddenly knocked over the soup bowl with a bang, and rolled quickly to the side of the table. Eddard Stark, who was next to Duke Tyrell, was also shocked at this time, but he did not just watch, but held the dagger and stabbed it quickly when the thing passed by, but the thing rolled around as if it had eyes and quickly flew away. The sound of plates colliding and screams came from the long table. The dark yellow chicken leg that had taken a bath finally rolled into the arms of Duke Tully of the Riverland, and then fell to the ground and rolled away quickly while the old man was frightened. Seeing this, the puppy wandering under their table immediately ran after it. "Gods, what the hell is this thing?" Under the table, on the table, in the open space, in the aisle. There were waves of chickens and dogs flying and accompanied by shouts and screams of fear. The throne room was in chaos at the moment. Even some people who didn't see the real situation were attracted. The increasingly panicked atmosphere made many people leave their seats in a hurry to avoid it, but many people also approached. The young king, the chief, naturally would not ignore this. He stared at the dog and the chicken leg moving back and forth between the legs of the banquet crowd with wide eyes. The new queen beside him also covered her mouth with horror. Two little boys not far away stared at the familiar thing without blinking, and their thoughts were completely different from others. The farce was finally stopped by a foot. Stannis, who had left the table at some point, quietly walked to the path where the chicken leg was bouncing, and then took advantage of its unpreparedness and stepped on it at once. Feeling the waves of struggle coming from his feet that he should not have, he couldn't help but frown. However, before Stannis bent down to pick it up, he suddenly felt his feet loosen, and then he saw that the strange thing actually used the method of taking off its skin to break free from his trampling and quickly fled. However, the strange thing did not roll over a few times, and the little white dog who was whimpering and staring at it had already reacted quickly and pounced on it, and couldn't wait to bite the thing in its mouth and chew it quickly. It seemed so impatient, as if it thought it was a delicacy. The chicken leg kept struggling in its mouth and front paws, but it couldn't get rid of it. In the end, it was quickly eaten by the dog without leaving any bones. The noisy banquet hall became quite quiet at this time, and hundreds of eyes stared at all this. No one went to stop it, not even Stannis next to the dog. And the dog itself did not turn around and run after achieving its wish. Instead, it fell to the ground and barked a few times as if it was drunk, and then hugged Stannis and moved under the stunned gaze of many nobles. This situation was so absurd, yet so strange. After a moment of silence, the crowd broke the silence in the throne room with unbearable laughter, followed by various hilarious noises. The person involved was very calm about this, lowering his head and observing quietly without moving, and when he found no additional changes, he kicked it away. Unexpectedly, the puppy whimpered and howled as it flew backwards. After landing, it did not give up. Instead, it rolled up with red eyes and approached a drunken red-robed figure who was closer. "Whose good puppy are you? Why are you so enthusiastic?" The red-robed figure looked down blankly, obviously not seeing what happened before, but the words caused a burst of laughter around him. Several dukes and even the young king began to laugh. However, behind this laughter, a group of doubts always lingered in people's hearts. There was no matchmaking, no external force, and the light in the banquet hall was not strong, but that did not prevent people from seeing the truth. A chicken leg that can move and avoid obstacles? It seems to be cooked. This is the first time in everyone's memory. You are so popular with dogs, I will call you a son of a bitch-saurus from now on, ha ha ha. The young king laughed with ease, but his brows were unconsciously frowned, and someone beside him smiled and agreed. The gods must have been impatient and sent this dog to urge our king to end the banquet. It was not known whether this was a joke or a self-consolation. Anyway, the banquet continued, but many people became absent-minded. The dog was taken away by a Frey family member in the Riverlands soon after. It was obviously a pet of one of their family members. But few people noticed that after kicking the dog away, Stannis bent down and picked up something that was still moving under his feet. After thinking for a moment, he handed it to the horrified Grand Maester Pycelle. There are many awkward paragraphs in this chapter. Please make do with it. Gideon can't even write about a dog in heat now. It has been changed to pieces. Chapter 124. After all the chaos, the wedding banquet still continued, but the focus of people's discussion was no longer on the wedding itself. Surprise, contemplation, fear, curiosity. Some people who didn't understand and pretended to understand began to spread all kinds of unreliable explanations in a mysterious manner. Some people who really knew something were quite low-key and silent and meditated alone. At this time, people at the banquet were impetuous, and even the king himself was confused. He and Grand Maester Pycelle asked in a low voice what was going on with that moving thing, let alone other people. People's general belief is that there are witches at work, or some mysterious people such as wizards and magicians who have disappeared for a long time are causing trouble. They are not too panicked about this. After all, there are stories about dragons and various ghosts in this world. In daily life, many people have encountered some related people dressed in sneaky ways, but this is the first time they have encountered such obvious supernatural phenomena. Others blamed the thing on the ghost of the Red Keep. The idea that the Red Keep is haunted was spread when Renly fell into the secret passage. Now it has been mentioned again, and in the face of evidence, many people are more convinced of it. In short, a wedding dinner seemed to have suddenly turned into a discussion about mysterious events, and even the subsequent dancing session did not seem to be lively at all. The red-robed monk Thuras, who was hugged by a dog, unknowingly became the focus of the party, and the drunken party was quite confused about this. However, when the wedding dinner reached the last stage, people unconsciously turned their attention back to the wedding itself, or the most anticipated part of the wedding, the bridal chamber. In Westeros, the final stage of a wedding is very barbaric. At this stage, the newlyweds will be stripped naked by the onlookers, and then they will be escorted into the new house. This is a link that people love to hear and see, and it is also a link where many sneaky people can take advantage of things openly. Renly thought this custom was even a bit disgusting. The large group of people stripping the newlyweds naked and telling dirty jokes made his eyes jump. If anyone dares to do this when I get married, I promise to chop off their hands. Watching the two stripped-off newlyweds walking further and further away surrounded by the crowd, Renly, who was watching from the sidelines, said this to Tyrion. These words made the blonde boy who was looking at him glance at him strangely. Are you engaged, Renly? No. Renly replied with a blink of an eye, and the other party snorted, feeling that this person's thoughts were a bit incomprehensible. Not only Tyrion, but also the people next to him looked at him strangely after hearing this, thinking it was strange. Obviously, things that seemed unreasonable to Renly had long been taken for granted by others. Even the person involved didn't seem to care much. The naked Robert laughed and teased the women around him, not caring that his wife was being taken advantage of by men. The newlywed queen, who had always been elegant and dignified, seemed to be able to cope with it as usual. She seemed to be slightly disgusted, but she did not express any dissatisfaction. Shaking his head, Renly simply looked away and stopped looking. Instead, he called his companions to walk out of the corridor and come to an open-air courtyard to get some fresh air. The moonlight is deserted, but the surrounding atmosphere is very warm. At this moment, a new couple has been sent into the room. The lively day is basically over. After waking up early tomorrow morning, the Baratheon dynasty will welcome a new man. Brand new hostess. If it weren't for the memory of his past life, Renly's impression of this mistress was actually pretty good. Her attitude was kind, her personality seemed normal, and she would often give him various small gifts to show her care. It's a pity that he is a younger brother. Thinking about it, Renly suddenly saw another person involved in the shadows in the corner of the courtyard. Now the person was looking expressionlessly in the direction where the crowd disappeared without saying a word. James? Why didn't you follow? The boy next to Renly also saw him and ran forward to ask curiously. The other party frowned when he heard this, and then pretended to smile casually and said, "There are so many people. It's too hot, let's get some cool air here." One sentence seemed to have exhausted his patience. Seeing Renly beside him, he bowed to him as a greeting, then turned and left directly. "He looks a little strange today." Looking at his brother's back, Tyrion, whose mind is not very mature, wondered. He used to love to join in the fun. "People change," Renly replied with a shrug. "My girlfriend is getting married, but the groom is not me. This would not be easy for anyone else." But thinking about it this way, who among these three people cheated on whom? Tyrion obviously couldn't imagine what kind of bad thoughts were in the mind of the black-haired companion next to him. Sitting on the railing at the edge of the courtyard, he faintly listened to the noise outside and spoke thoughtfully. Said, "The dog ate the chicken leg." Renly nodded but said nothing. "I heard that it was the pet of a girl from the Frey family in Twin City. I saw their knights got the dog back," Tyrion said, suddenly winking at Renly. "The red-robed monk is still a little reluctant to leave. I hope he still feels reluctant to let go after he sobers up." Renly touched his chin. "It would be a pity to be eaten by that dog," Tyrion said sadly. "Such an interesting thing will be gone if you don't." If only it was gone. Renly thought to himself. He felt that it was a little abnormal for the dog to suddenly go into heat after eating the chicken leg, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. After all, he was at a loss about the chicken leg. "I hope there won't be any accidents." He looked down at his left wrist, and the special pattern made him frown unconsciously. On the way back to the Maester's room, Grand Maester Pycelle was very nervous. Because the ironkin in his arms was constantly shaking. The noise behind him was getting farther and farther away with his footsteps, and he didn't catch up with the long-awaited wedding night. The old man with grey beard couldn't help complaining about why Stannis gave him this numbing thing, so that he had to leave with the kin in his arms before the wedding was over. That's fine, doesn't he know that as a weathered old man, he can't stand being frightened? It would be good to send 2 soldiers. Feeling the trembling ironkin in his arms, the old man walked fearfully on the quiet road of the Red Castle, and couldn't help but imagine in his mind. Magic doesn't exist. This must be something we can't understand yet. Yes, it must be like this. Muttering, he seemed to regard it as a life-saving spell, but just after the old man finished speaking, he suddenly felt that the ironkin in his arm stopped moving. With a thump in his heart, the old man felt a little bad, but he cautiously did not open the can, but still held it and walked towards the destination, preparing to write a letter to Oldtown as soon as he arrived at the place, reporting what happened today to the Cardinal, and then quickly sending this thing to the Citadel. He didn't have the slightest curiosity to find out, and he didn't want to open the can at all. The Citadel always has a way to figure it out. Thinking so, the old man felt a little relieved. At this time, a maid was walking by with a fluffy yellowish-brown pet dog. When she saw Grand Maester Pycelle, she stopped to salute and greeted him. The old man also politely returned the salute and glanced at him. But usually his focus was on the figure of the opposite sex, but at this time, the attention of this old man in his 60s was all on the maid. For some reason, he suddenly felt that the yellow-haired puppy looked so handsome. Chapter 125. When the heavy door creaked shut, all the noise was blocked out. The candle light flickered and swayed on the green carpet, and the unique smell of candle oil drifted into his nostrils. The boy, who had finished a busy day, breathed a sigh of relief at the door, and then suddenly murmured, "May the warrior give me courage." After waiting for a while, there was no response. He walked towards the bed without caring, and then collapsed on it. After Robert's wedding, Renly was basically liberated. In the next 2 days, he planned to carefully study the new abilities he had at this time. The Psychic Heart, the Warrior's Son, and the Chaos Mark. Compared with the past, these 3 abilities are more wonderful than the other. Renly attaches the most importance to, or is most worried about, the Chaos Mark, which is not even recorded in the system information, because it seems to be uncontrollable and has no beneficial effects except causing chaos. The Warrior's Son ability is probably useful in battle, but it's impossible for him to encounter any battles in his childish appearance, and its prayer power doesn't seem to be that reliable. Except for the first time when Renly said something to Tyrion, he said it 7 or 8 times today, but there was no feedback. Maybe this blessing is not obvious, or maybe it's useless to say it to himself. The last psychic heart seems to be effective as long as it is a living thing, which means it is not limited to humans. Renly thought about asking the servants to find him a few birds or other pets to try tomorrow morning, but he didn't have any expectations for it. After all, its description is to hear the voices of living things, not to communicate with them. Simply hearing the voices of cats and dogs is obviously useless to him. Apart from these gains, the knight profession that took him the longest time to obtain is also useless at the moment. He is only 5 years old at this time, and there are more than 2 months before his 6th birthday. When he thought of this, the boy frowned unconsciously, feeling that it would be great if he could be reborn like the time travelers in the novels in his memory, and he would be an adult right away, so there would be no such troubles of growing up, let alone carefully disguising himself as a child. Life is not satisfactory, 8 out of 10 times. Muttering, a servant brought a bucket of bath water outside, and Renly stopped thinking about it. He took off his clothes and soaked in it. The warm feeling from his body made him breathe a sigh of relief, and then he leaned against the bucket to relax his body and mind, feeling faintly drowsy. Relying on the special blood in his body, he was not afraid of drowning, so occasionally when taking a bath, he would fall in it and sleep for a while without any worries, and then come out and go back to bed to continue sleeping when the water cooled down. Because of his special quirk, the maids would avoid him when he was bathing, and no one noticed the boy's specialness. But this time Renly did not fall asleep, because when he was in a trance in the water, he suddenly saw a reflection on the surface of the bath water that should not exist. The black reflection had a pair of blue eyes, squatting quietly on the edge of the bathtub, with a slender figure, and the shadow was reflected on the water surface. This figure was very familiar, and Renly had even looked for it for a long time before. But it was also very strange, because in the center of its chest, there was a piece of gold and grey mixed with something that looked like scales. Staring at the reflection in the water, he couldn't help but look up at the edge of the empty wooden basin, and then look down at the black cat in the water that raised its paws as if to greet him, and Renly was full of confusion. "Have you become a ghost?" He stretched out his fingers and stirred the bath water. The reflection of the black cat also rippled continuously. It seemed to hear what Renly was saying. After hearing it, it tilted its head, as if a little puzzled. It may not have realized what it looked like now. It opened its mouth and seemed to call a few times, but Renly did not hear any sound. In a trance, the black-haired boy felt that everything he saw was a bit scary. So he didn't care about bathing in the water. He jumped out and put on the satin pajamas prepared by the maid in advance, and then returned to the bathtub and looked down. The cat had disappeared. This made Renly speechless for a long time. The moving chicken legs, the male dog in heat, the black cat that seemed to have disappeared but could be seen from the water, and the scales full of déjà vu. Originally, Renly thought that the cat ran away by itself, but now it seems that it is not the case. But since it didn't run away, what did it encounter to become like that? And the scales? Thinking of this, the boy couldn't help but look at his left wrist. The black and white mark made him look dazed. Is it because of this? There was no answer. His mind was completely confused. Facing this supernatural situation, Renly felt a deep sense of powerlessness. Obviously, he couldn't sleep well that night in this state, so when he had breakfast the next morning, the black-haired boy looked a little depressed. "Renly, look at you like you saw a ghost. Did you marry a wife yesterday?" The young king at the head of the table laughed and teased. The blonde woman at the hostess seat opposite also smiled and glanced at the boy, but for some reason, her smile seemed very forced. "I'm thinking about the chicken leg," Renly answered, and Robert's smile faded. After coughing dryly, he said, "A child wants to do so much. There are so many weird things in the world. When I was in the valley, I saw a headless chicken walking back and forth. Much scarier than last night. I don't know if he was trying to comfort him or if it was really the case." Renly just said "oh" after hearing the words, said no more, and just spread butter on the white bread slices. At this time, besides the king and his wife, there was Stannis at the table, but there was no need for this man to never speak. Cersei, who seemed to have a lively personality a while ago, seemed to be in a bad mood on her first day as queen, so the only voice at this breakfast was the nagging voice of His Majesty the King. 2 days later, Duke Tyrell will set off to return to the Reach. Your safety is guaranteed with him, so I don't plan to send you an escort, but servants are indispensable, and there is still money. Tyrell said they will be responsible for all your expenses in Highgarden. Their family is quite wealthy, but we Baratheons will not take advantage of him. When you get there, make 2 more friends for me. The children of the Tyrell family are very suitable, and the Tully family of Hornhill. I heard that Randall's bastard wife gave him a son not long ago. I have a lot of objections to him, but it has nothing to do with you. You can go around when you have time, but you can't be as lonely as you were at Storm's End. Let me tell you, this is a task assigned to you by the king. Don't take it seriously. By the way, Renly, you should be more diligent after you go to the Reach. Pycelle said that you have never studied with him. This is not good. You should study more at such a young age. You miss me. Then. He's so nagging. The black cat Balerion thought to himself. He lay down at the feet of the black-haired boy and looked up at the face of his little master sitting on the chair. He seemed to be listening attentively, but in fact he seemed to have something wrong. Resistant. Seeing this, its fluffy tail couldn't help but sway, and it felt a little happy. The black cat hates the man sitting in the first place. I don't know why, but it always has the urge to go up and scratch his face to pieces. I just heard people say that the man seems to be the little master's brother, so it has been holding back. Manage. Now seeing that his little master is also annoying him, he is really happy, but after looking at the little boy next to him, who he thinks is very beautiful, he feels very sad. Why has the little master been ignoring me for the past 2 days? Its little mind is full of doubts and even a little depressed. That day, when he saw his little master sleeping deeply on the bed, he bravely jumped up and slept in his arms all night. As a result, the little master ignored him after waking up. Is he angry? The black cat thought so, and glanced at the boy's legs hanging on the chair beside him with its bright blue eyes. It instinctively wanted to rub against him to please him, but it remembered that its little master was bothered by touching him, so he had no choice but to meow weakly, trying to attract the other person's attention. It's a pity that he still ignores himself. So the black cat put his head on his paws in a depressed mood, feeling vaguely that he had fallen out of favor. However, as a smart cat, it believed that it could never sit still and wait for death, so after lying down and yawning, it pretended to casually press a hard object under its paws to the ground and rub it, hoping that the noise would let yourself attract some attention. It was a pocket-sized knight's helmet, which seemed to be about the size of a palm. Black Cat found it at the banquet yesterday. Last night there was a very strange pocket knight being chased by a dog and running around. He was shouting and seemed so scared that he accidentally dropped his helmet on the ground without even bothering to pick it up, so he crouched behind the little master. The black cat ran up to bite it and brought it back. The cat's thinking made it feel that this was no big deal, but another voice in the heart always made it think that such a small and lifelike helmet seemed very precious, so the black cat kept biting it and walking around, treating it like made a treasure. But now, in order to attract the little master's attention, it no longer cares about whether it is precious or not, and concentrates on flipping its paws, hoping that some heartless guy will take a look at it. Its behavior successfully created a lot of noise, and the sound of the hard pocket helmet rubbing against the ground was even louder than the annoying guy's voice. It's a pity that he still ignores himself. Black Cat increased his strength unconvinced. So this pocket iron helmet just rubbed on the ground, and the sound of the checkered marble surface rubbing against the metal was clattering, clattering, clattering. Don't worry, everyone, this book will be released on the shelves next Friday without any surprise. Chapter 126. As a smart cat, Black Cat Balerion felt very confused these 2 days. The beautiful little master is very attractive, and there is a special aura on him that makes him feel at ease. So the black cat rarely pays attention to humans other than the master, but rarely does not mean never. Because the master never prepared food for it, it had to temporarily leave the master's side when it was hungry. Every time it did this, it would feel full of irritability, and when it looked at others, it always had the urge to tear them apart regardless of anything. This impulse was very tempting, but the black cat could suppress its nature every time because it didn't want to cause any trouble to the master. It was just that these 2 days when it found that the master had been ignoring it all the time, and even its deliberate behavior of looking for scolding did not attract attention, the black cat could no longer bear it. When it went out to look for food in the morning, it jumped down from the wall of the Red Castle and attacked a passing male noble, and finally scratched his entire face. When blood splashed all over him, and when the human screamed in fear and fled in panic, the black cat felt a strange sense of fulfillment, as if some kind of revenge was satisfied. Deep in his heart, a number emerged. 43. This number appeared as if instinctively, but it was not like this at the beginning, and later it became less and less. The black cat felt that this number was very important to him, but he didn't know how important it was. In other words, sometimes when he felt bored, he would think, he is just a cat, why do he know these knowledge that should only be possessed by humans? What is knowledge? What is a cat? The inexplicable thoughts that popped up in his mind made him unable to understand, so the black cat shook his head, looked at the back of the hurriedly running away, and began to lick his bloody claws. According to his few but impressive experiences, it will not be long before a group of fierce humans will come to chase him, intimidate him, and even want to kill him. It had already made these preparations, but no one showed up after waiting for a long time, which made the black cat's mood, which had calmed down a little due to the attack, become irritable again. It felt that those people should not ignore it, and there was no reason for them to ignore it. Aren't they very fierce? Why didn't they come and stab it to death? Stab it to death, it should be stabbed to death, blood, screams, grins, drag her out from under the bed, one knife after another. The black cat was shocked by the picture that emerged in his heart, so it ran in the corner of the castle for a long time, and finally attacked another person, an old man holding a dog and behaving sneakily. It felt that this person seemed familiar, but it didn't matter. It just wanted to scratch him to pieces, and it also successfully defeated this old human who looked tall but was actually very cowardly. It was a pity that his little claws couldn't really scratch it to pieces, and finally he could only regretfully give up, and the number in his heart quietly became 42. It did not run away afterwards, but squatted not far away and waited for the other party's reaction. It wanted to see the hateful eyes of these humans, just as it hated these humans. But the old man with grey beard only sat on the ground and cried, as if he was frightened by something, with snot and tears, and he didn't even look at it. The black cat felt something was wrong in its little head, so it did not go away, but squatted in the corner, watching the cowardly old man, watching the dog in his arms running away with its tail between its legs, and watching a group of people arrive here soon. Then, it found that no one paid attention to it, and no one even looked at it. What happened to them? The black cat felt very puzzled about this, and this puzzlement continued until it returned to the little master's side, the irritability in its heart subsided, and its reason recovered, and then it suddenly reacted slowly. Can't they see themselves? The little master is like this, the two people attacked by it are like this, and even everyone is like this. They can't see themselves. To confirm this, it decided to take the risk of drinking some of the lemon tea in its owner's cup, so it did so carefully. Then, it found that the little master in front of it, who usually disliked it, had no idea of this, and even took a sip of the cup without changing his expression, and then continued to sit there and read attentively. Seeing all this, a cheer rose in its little heart in vain, and it even jumped off the table and kept shaking its head around its owner triumphantly, but when it found that its show-off behavior also did not attract the slightest attention, the joy in its heart instantly dissipated, and its wagging tail drooped down, and a sense of loneliness enveloped its entire young heart. That night, the black cat Beleriand hid in the corner, staring blankly at the little master who was sleeping on the bed, feeling that the cat's life had lost all meaning. And when someone brought a bird to its master as a substitute the next morning, it instinctively thought so. It became like a tiger whose territory was invaded, with its fur standing on end, and it bared its teeth and threatened the servant. However, no one paid any attention to it, just as no one could see it, and no one could hear the sound it made. The servant stood respectfully aside, while the young master was interested in teasing the ugly bird in the cage, completely ignoring him. The black cat felt very frustrated. It wanted to raise its claws to hit the hateful servant, but it rationally thought that this was not a good idea, so it finally collapsed on the carpet in the room and began to sulk. Then it suddenly discovered that the color of the hair under its neck was a little different from that of the hair next to it. This question suddenly reminded its young brain of some hazy images, which happened when it ran to its master's bed to sleep that day. It also remembered that the bed full of the master's fragrance seemed to become very transparent at that time, and then some pattern appeared on its young master's wrist, and then it seemed to see a little golden thing floating up from under the transparent bed, and finally, because it was lying on the root it floated, it got into its hair? It seems to be like this, but the black cat feels like he has overlooked something. What is it? A laugh that sounds a bit crazy? Or a fat pig with a pair of leaf wings? Thinking of this, the black cat's young mind is full of confusion again, because it doesn't remember that it has seen or heard these, but why can it remember this? Forget it, no matter why, it doesn't matter at all. Thinking of this, the black cat lay there dejectedly, feeling a little hopeless, and even the hunger that came soon after did not attract its attention. But when there was a special noise from the owner's side, it couldn't help but tilt its head to look over. Then it found that the little master who was originally sitting on the marble base of the toilet, frowning and thinking, now had a colorful poisonous snake wrapped around his waist. The snake's head was raised backwards, and the pale yellow vertical pupils were staring coldly at itself outside the door, and the tongue in its mouth kept stretching and shrinking. The black cat felt threatened, but it also saw the little face of its little master who seemed to be unaware of the danger, which made it jump up and scream, and then rushed forward without hesitation. As a result, the seemingly powerful venomous snake reversed its previous hostility and quickly broke away from the boy's waist. Its long body slid through the toilet hole on the marble base and disappeared. The black cat felt relieved when he saw this, and the childish voice that always made it feel intimate also sounded in surprise. Damn, my belt! Chapter 127. The 2 days after the wedding were relatively uneventful, except for the fact that the mark on Renly's left hand broke out when he went to the toilet, causing the bell to crawl away on its own. What is also strange is that Grand Maester Pycelle was attacked by an unknown animal. His face was covered in blood and he was lying on the ground crying with his face covered, which caused a lot of discussion. The servant claimed that it was a dog that attacked him because someone saw a dog near the scene of the crime, but the client denied this and said that it was his new dog and not his attacker. But when asked to tell him what specifically attacked him, the old man hesitated and couldn't tell. In the end, the matter was dropped, and Renly didn't pay much attention to it. After the wedding, the only thing that needed to be busy was the moving away from King's Landing, but with the presence of servants, Renly himself didn't need to do this. Instead, he began some leisurely bird-raising activities. It was a beautiful canary. Its orange and green feathers and small size made it look very cute. Unfortunately, Renly teased the little bird squatting in the cage after the servant brought it to him that day. She didn't pay much attention to him, just combing her feathers and chirping occasionally, as if she had no intention of spiritually communicating with him. Renly thought that this might require cultivating a relationship first, so he didn't take it seriously. But when he woke up the next day, he found that the canary that had been kept in the cage was missing. There was nothing but a pile of messy bird feathers in its place. Renly is wary of this, but he has no time to look for the murderer because it is already time to set out. The king's wedding is a temporary end to all previous events. Although there will be a tournament to celebrate the wedding, not everyone is interested in it. So except for the knights who were preparing to participate in the competition, everyone else left the noisy city of King's Landing and returned to their respective territories. Stark in the north and the lords under his command, Lannister in the west, Tully in the Riverlands, and Tyrell in the Reach. Hundreds of lords spread out from King's Landing and rushed towards Westeros in all directions. Among them, as one of the top nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, the team of the Tyrell family was very eye-catching. Compared with the simplicity when they arrived, the team now numbered no less than 100 people, including grooms, cooks, servants, personal knights, crossbowmen. More than 20 carriages were loaded with armor, tents, and supplies. A large carriage embroidered with bright golden roses was the core of the team. The capable knights guarded the sides, while the soldiers guarded the periphery. At the edge, there was a clear division of labor. The servants are constantly busy, and all of them are just to serve the 2 people in the carriage. 2 people, one large and one small. Don't believe the rumors, Renly. Although there are several orchards, the territory of House Red Apple Fossoway is not actually rich in apples. The name mainly comes from Fozo, the archer in the Age of Heroes, who is the son of Garth Greenhand. It is said that whichever girl he likes, he will shoot the apple off her head. The tall Duke Tyrell explained with a smile the origin of the coat of arms of his vassal family. Opposite him, a boy with short charcoal black hair sat there and listened quietly, his stunning blue eyes blinking, occasionally, with a hint of sudden revelation. However, in fact, he already knew what the other party said. This is a large carriage. The inner wall is wrapped in golden silk. The interior of the silk is made of smooth oak and metal. The space is spacious. There are 6 horses pulling the carriage outside the carriage. The coachman's shouting sound reaches his ears through the carriage. For dullness. The journey was long, and children could not ride horses, so Duke Tyrell specially prepared this carriage for riding. Of course, the Duke himself also enjoyed it. After all, riding a horse for a long time is very tiring. As the team moved forward, various trivial sounds continued. The huge khaki-colored city became increasingly hazy as the carriage rolled forward, and was eventually submerged in the mist of the green field behind. Surrounded by patches of uneven grassland, grey roads shrouded in mist extend in all directions across the plains. A large number of figures can be faintly seen walking through these roads: free riders, horse-drawn carriages, ox carts, traders, missionaries, hiking farmer. King's Landing is the central capital of the entire Westeros continent, and the roads around it naturally extend in all directions. From here, you can reach any castle territory in the Seven Kingdoms. As we all know, the earliest knights came from the Reach, and the earliest bachelors also came from the Reach. Of course, there were also the earliest singers, gardeners, and stonemasons. So you don't need to worry about your studies in Highgarden, Lan. Literary. If you have studied the history of the North, you should know that the ancestors of the Stark family are also descendants of our Green Hand Garth, which is enough to prove the long heritage and rich heritage of the Reach. When he was bored on the road, the young duke with curly brown hair began to introduce Renly to the various historical legends and vassal lords in the Reach. Although Renly knew some things already, but even more, he actually doesn't understand many of them. However, he did not listen to everything. There were many false and boastful words in the words of the Duke of Mace. For example, Brandon the Builder, the ancestor of the Stark family, was descended from Garth the Green Hand, the common ancestor of the nobles in the River Bend. Apart from this, there is basically no tangible evidence beyond some folklore. And in some legends, even the founder of the Lannister family in the west and the founder of the Baratheon family in the ancient Stormlands are descendants of Garth. It is said that the common ancestor of the Riverlands in the Age of Heroes can make infertile women, including menopausal old women, fertile with just a touch of his hand. It can be seen how exaggerated these legends are. Leaving King's Landing was not a big deal for Renly, because he didn't know many people there, mainly his two brothers. However, as the king, the former was busy with affairs, and as the Minister of the Navy, the latter was also busy all day long. Whether Renly left or not did not affect the relationship between the brothers, because there was not much to begin with. In addition, the only people Renly knew well were Davos, the Onion Knight under Stannis, and Barry Stan of the King's Guard. However, after the wedding, Davos himself headed towards the rainforest of the Stormlands, preparing to inspect and make arrangements in the territory given to him by Stannis. The latter came to see him off, but the question he asked made the black-haired boy unsure how to answer. "Where is the black cat named Bael Ryan?" Renly thought, "Who should I ask if you ask me?" The explanation he gave was that the cat ran away wildly and he didn't know where it went. So the King's Guard, who was a little sad, felt quite disappointed about this. "Don't doubt it, Renly. We will meet many castles on the way, but you have to believe that only Highgarden is the most beautiful one in the entire River Reach, no, in the entire Seven Kingdoms." The words from the other side interrupted the boy's thoughts. As far as he could see, Lord Tyrell with brown curly hair was looking at a small castle far away outside the carriage with a proud tone. The Duke was a very vain man, and he kept praising his territory and family, but Renly was not bored with these words. Apart from figuring out his own golden finger, his greatest wish was to be a traveler, and he was naturally very curious about the legends and customs of various places. "Is Old Town as smelly as King's Landing?" he asked a rather sharp question. "Smelly?" Lord Tyrell shook his head and said, "I have to say that King's Landing is the smelliest city I have ever seen. After all, there are too many people there. Old Town doesn't smell very good either, but I rarely go to inspect it, and I don't know if it has improved in the past 2 years. Is the water of the Red Lake red?" "Of course, otherwise why would it be called the Red Lake?" "Is the oak throne really a living oak tree?" "We all say so, but those damn Dornish people didn't give us the chance to see it." During the conversation, Renly had certain expectations for his life in the near future, mainly because he felt that he had become much freer after being freed from his brother's control. "It's just..." The boy in the carriage frowned unconsciously, and his left hand hanging by his side quietly covered a sudden appearance. It was a tender green branch stretching out from the corner of the carriage seat. It looked like an ordinary grass, but it was not normal for it to grow on a fur cushion, and the reason for its appearance was just that Renly accidentally touched it. If this special situation is not taken into account, the future life is still very exciting, he thought secretly. The mark on his left hand had occurred 3 times in the past few days. Once it turned his buttons into stone, once it made the dagger in his hand become limp, and the last time it turned the wooden water cup in his hand into a pile of sand, and the water in it spilled all over his crotch. It can only be said that the only lucky thing was that he was in his own tent at the time and was not seen by others, but some childish rumors brought about by it made him quite distressed. It looked wonderful and interesting, but Renly only felt troubled by this uncontrollable ability. The team kept moving forward, and the people in it had their own thoughts, while outside the team, the discussion about this group of people never stopped. The news that the king's younger brother Renly was sent to Highgarden as an adopted son had spread in the River Reach due to some people's intentional or unintentional propaganda, and there was a lot of discussion. Chapter 128. The nobles of the upper class were busy attending His Majesty the King's wedding banquet. Travelers from all over the country and even the hired knights were also talking about it. Even after the wedding, the discussion did not stop. As for the people of the Reach, apart from the wedding and the king, what they talked about the most was the king's youngest brother Renly. Since His Majesty Robert sent his younger brother to Highgarden as an adopted son, it naturally means that His Majesty is no longer prepared to pursue the issue of the Reach standing on the Targaryen side. In the noisy outdoor hotel, a plainly dressed businessman said this to the people next to him. Of course I won't pursue it. There is a huge piece of land next to the Stormland. It doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with us. That's right, as long as we don't raise taxes, anything is easy to say. Dragonstone should be given to the eldest son of the king. Is that Renly our future king? How is that possible? He doesn't have the right to inherit. But traditionally, what do you think Lord Renly would look like? What can a child look like? Hedge knight, mercenary, businessman, traveler, bard. There is no shortage of these existences in hotels based in the wild. Therefore, there is always a lot of news gathered here. Of course, false news accounts for the majority. Sitting at a table in the corner of the first floor, White Deer Wenda drank a bowl of rabbit soup while listening to the many discussions around her. Her presence didn't attract much attention, because she was wearing a headscarf and a dusty robe, and she was dressed very low-key. Women walking alone in the Seven Kingdoms are relatively rare, but not unheard of, not to mention she looks like a peasant woman living nearby. Who would have thought that this seemingly inconspicuous peasant woman was once a fierce female bandit famous in the Seven Kingdoms? Wenda silently listened to the discussions around her. Starting from King's Landing, we continued along a road called Rose Avenue. The further we headed towards Highgarden, the more discussions there were about our lord. People obviously regarded the arrival of the Duke of Dragonstone as a peace signal from the new king, and even some local residents of the Riverbend welcomed it. After all, the Seven Kingdoms are now in post-war peace, and the people of the Reach do not want to fall into war again. However, Wenda was alone here at this time, and her purpose was naturally not to understand the information that she already knew, but to find out some other things that she didn't know. After the boy was canonized as the Duke of Dragonstone, the promise he made before had already met the basic conditions, and when the two dukes left King's Landing and headed to the Reach, he even picked up the one who had always been there. Wenda, who was waiting in King's Landing, set out with her son. However, it is not the character of this former bandit to follow a large army in a disciplined manner. Although the war ended not long ago and there was peace in the Seven Kingdoms, it was not without danger. When traveling to an unfamiliar environment, it is necessary to understand the local situation. So on the way, she kept walking at the front of the team, trying to find out all kinds of information about her little master. There is an old woman over there in the Noble Heart. I heard that she can predict things, but I don't know if it is true or not. The shadow lynx in the forest has been particularly active recently. Please be careful when you are on your way. Have you heard? A while ago, a woman named Migger fell from the sky over at Bitter Bridge. She was still wearing armor and crushed several pigs raised by Lord Caswell. The madwoman who called on the local peasants to follow her and rebel against King Robert. Rebel against King Robert? Madwoman. Yes, that's a lunatic. She called Baratheon a traitor, and said she would kill all the sons of warriors in the world. I don't know which family this crazy woman came out to talk nonsense about, who didn't. Do you know that there are no warrior sons in the Seven Kingdoms? Everyone knows that Migger doesn't live long. And that tyrant has been dead for more than 200 years. What a madman! What happened to that woman? It is said that our Lord Casway is busy chasing her everywhere. Because of those pigs. It's not just the pigs. Falling from the sky, or emerging from the water. Along the way, Wenda has heard rumors of such things 3 times, each time more exaggerated than the last, and she feels that this is ridiculous. Are these anecdotes of things falling from the sky very popular in the countryside these days? She remembered that before setting off, similar news had spread in King's Landing. It is said that shortly after His Majesty the King's wedding, a large number of sea fish appeared inexplicably in a well in Flea Bottom, causing the surrounding poor people to go crazy. Experience tells Wenda that this kind of news is basically false, but if you are tired from traveling, listening to it can relax your mind. But this time she didn't listen completely, because a middle-aged businessman wearing a linen shirt suddenly sat across from her table. "Good madam, the journey is long, why do you have to travel alone?" The middle-aged man asked with a smile as his brown eyes looked at the beautiful and well-hidden cheeks of the woman opposite. "Of course I hope some of the blind people can be more honest." Wenda replied with a smile, and the dagger she held upside down in her hand stabbed the wooden table with a loud sound, the tip of which penetrated deeply, and the handle trembled slightly. This was a warning and a signal. When the other party saw this, the smile on his face faded. He sat upright and coughed dryly before asking. "I'm from Old Town." "I wonder where are you from, madam?" "King's Landing." "King's Landing." The middle-aged man with a pair of thin eyebrows touched his chin. "Is there any interesting new news there? I mean, other than the wedding of our King Robert. I heard that customs duties will be increased. Is this interesting news?" "This is really bad." The other party sighed after hearing this, and then took the initiative to say without waiting for Wenda to speak, "A group of sneaky people have appeared in the Old Town recently. They seem to be from the Eastern Continent, and they are spreading the word that the door to the Old World has been opened. Everyone must find that door and close it, otherwise the whole world will be destroyed because of the chaos pouring in behind the door. Ahem, many doors in Old Town have been broken by those madmen recently. I heard that the Sea Count Tar is considering driving them out of his territory." Wenda laughed dumbly when she heard this. There is no shortage of lunatics in this world, and there are countless religious lunatics. For example, a sect in the Eastern Continent that believes in Arhillar, the Lord of Light, is very abnormal in her opinion. She also knows about a religion called the Cult of the Place of the Stars. Everyone inside nervously worships a meteorite that fell from the sky, claiming that it can save the world. This kind of information was too unrealistic and basically useless to Wenda, so after hearing it, she didn't take it seriously and asked about other things. "Do you know anything about the Iron Islands?" "The Iron Islands have been the main enemy of the Reach for thousands of years, so if you are in the Reach, if there is any threat, the Ironborn there are one. We only know that the gentle King Corin died in the battle on the Shield Islands, and his son Balon became the new king." The merchant heard this and said, "So we have not dared to go to the Iron Islands recently because we haven't figured out who he is." Before King Balon's temper, no one could guarantee that he would still abide by the previous rules. Wenda nodded, and then told another piece of news. The old Prime Minister of the Eagle family went to Dorne. It is said that he is discussing peace talks. This may allow you to restore Dorne's trade routes. The merchant raised his eyebrows when he heard this. Resumption of trade routes? This is good news. Gods bless you. I hope Prime Minister Island's process goes smoothly. The blonde woman dressed as a peasant woman chuckled in response, and after saying a few more words, the vendor took the initiative to end the exchange of information. Watching the other party's leaving figure, Wenda narrowed her eyes. This kind of exchange of information is very common during the journey. She has encountered this kind of thing before. The information gained is usually of little practical value. But that guy didn't look like a businessman, but rather like a professionally trained spy. Is there a lord fighting nearby? The female bandit secretly guessed. Chapter 129. As they continued to travel, the weather around them gradually became colder, but it was not that the further south they went, the colder it would get, but that autumn was coming. The climate of this world was very strange, and there was no regularity in the change of seasons. For example, this summer had lasted for nearly 2 years, and in Renly's memory, there were 2 years of snow-filled winter. Summer and winter were the themes of this world, and autumn and spring were relatively short. The carriage moved slowly, and stopped at many castles in the Reach on the way, so that when the team arrived in front of Highgarden, the first castle of the Reach, more than a month had passed. The team had a large number of people, and the lords of the Reach always sent soldiers to accompany them for protection along the way, so there were no unexpected situations. Except for Renly's left hand. The onset of the chaos mark could not be controlled, and it could not be predicted before the onset, so that Renly was a little cautious even when peeing, and his daily life was seriously affected. He wore gloves, but sometimes this ability would ignore the existence of gloves, and sometimes it would directly act on the gloves. Later, he found a solution that was not a solution, which was to wear 2 layers of gloves. This method sounds unreliable, but it is unexpectedly effective in actual use. Although Renly was puzzled by it, he was somewhat relieved. In addition to the trouble caused by his left hand, the rest was only the fatigue caused by the continuous travel. More than a month of continuous travel was boring, even if he always stopped to participate in the reception banquets held by the major families in the river reach. Fortunately, Renly's physique was much better than before. Facing such a long journey, he did not get sick. On the contrary, Duke Tyrell, who was traveling with him, accidentally caught a cold on the way. However, because of the consideration of the child's frailty, the team had a maester from the river reach to follow, which did not make the Duke's illness worse. So when they arrived at their destination, Duke Tyrell's illness was almost cured. Highgarden is the most beautiful castle in the Seven Kingdoms. This sentence was the most common one that Renly heard on the road. He had been a little skeptical before, but now he believed it. The carriage slowly moved forward in the hilly wilderness. Looking out of the window, the castle made of white marble at the end of the site was located on a high hill with a gentle slope. 3 consecutive walls rose up and surrounded the high hill. Looking from afar, the towers, green plants, fortresses, the rows of buildings had a strange beauty, which was obviously carefully designed. The land outside the castle was surrounded by a dense pine forest, with many sentry towers in the forest. As the team left the wilderness and walked into the forest, a wide river gradually emerged in front of them. Under the sun, the river with a bright luster flowed at the end of the pine forest. There were small boats leisurely in it, and the forest island was lush and green. The white castle named Highgarden stood quietly on the high ground on the other side of the river, majestic and exquisite, like a city-state inhabited by forest elves. This castle is not only beautiful, but also very large. The buildings are arranged layer by layer along the surface of the hill. At first glance, it can even be called a small town. However, in fact, it is just an exclusive castle where people from the Tyrell family can live. In comparison, Storm's End is a country bumpkin. Renly thought secretly. The team that passed through the pine forest finally stopped at the bank of the river in front of the castle. A straight stone bridge spanned the entire river and connected to the gate of the first wall of the castle on the opposite bank. Renly and Duke Mace got off the carriage and walked here on foot, and the other personnel followed behind. There were bursts of bird calls around, and the clear river water on both sides flowed at a moderate speed. At the end of the stone bridge is the entrance to the castle of Highgarden. Because someone had notified it in advance, the gate had been opened at this time, and a group of noble men and women dressed in bright and beautiful clothes stood in front of the door. The number of welcoming personnel was huge and looked grand, but this was normal. After all, Renly represented not only himself, but also the king behind him. "Welcome, Lord Renly, we have been looking forward to your arrival." After approaching, the beautiful woman with long silver hair raised her skirt and saluted the black-haired boy. "Just call me Renly, ma'am." The black-haired boy bowed in return and said seriously, "Don't call me sir, that's too much trouble. I'm not a child enough." The tender voice was full of serious emotions, which eased the unfamiliar atmosphere a lot. The silver-haired woman smiled slightly when she heard the words, and the people around her also smiled. "Come, Renly, let me introduce you, this is my beloved Lady Ellery, this is my eldest son Willis, and this little fat boy is my second son Garland, and this is..." The joy of returning home made the Duke of Mace next to him particularly enthusiastic. Every time he introduced someone, Renly would salute the other party politely, showing great humility and politeness. This is the attitude that should be taken. Although he and the Lord of Highgarden, Mace Tyrell, are both dukes, in fact, the two are very different. Renly's title only sounds good. The territory and strength he actually possesses are probably not as good as those of the other vassal. Among the Seven Kingdoms, Highgarden, or the reach behind it, is basically the strongest region in terms of comprehensive strength. Not to mention Renly's small broken island, even Baratheon's Stormlands cannot compare to him. In the continent of Westeros, the river bend has the largest population, the most prosperous spiritual civilization, and the richest land. And if it weren't for the abundance of gold mines in the Western Territory, even the Fortune Reach would be ranked number 1. In comparison, the Stormlands next to the river bend are simply shabby. Due to climate and geographical problems, the lords of the Stormlands are extremely poor. The Lord Baratheon family also has no money to go anywhere. Renly had long suspected that among the Seven Kingdoms, apart from the north, the Stormlands were the poorest. "My mother has limited legs and feet and is waiting in the banquet hall, where we have already prepared a welcome dinner." After the group of people exchanged greetings, they walked through the castle gate and walked along a green road full of thorns and hedges. The hostess of Highgarden said this. I hope Lady Olenna won't be impatient to wait. Renly stuck out his tongue after hearing this. I heard that she has a bad temper. The boy looked a little uneasy, and people around him couldn't help laughing when they saw this. After hearing this, a thin and well-dressed young man said with a smile, Grandma does have a bad temper, but I think she just likes to tell the truth, which is sometimes very difficult to avoid. Hurtful. The speaker was Willis Tyrell, the eldest son of the Duke of Mace and heir to Highgarden. He was a gentle-looking young man, several years older than Renly. The fat brown-haired man next to him was similar to Renly. A gift is as big as a gift. For example, she has always disliked Garland's body shape. She would just talk about it when there was something wrong. The brother's words made the little fat man with a round belly look over him resentfully. Vilas, can you please stop laughing at me in front of the guests? My good brother, you know exactly what ridicule is, the brown-haired boy replied with a smile. What is telling the truth? These words made the little fat man bulge his face with anger. People except him were quite happy to watch. Renly on the side felt that these two brothers were very interesting. He was not very familiar with these two people, because they did not exist in the show he had watched in his previous life, but in fact they were the most important figures in the next generation of the Tyrell family. In contrast, one of the little gays Renly knew was just learning to walk and was being followed behind by the Duchess holding her hand. The other was just a swaddled baby girl. He was held in the nurse's arms and fell asleep. Chapter 130. The welcome banquet held in Highgarden Castle was very grand, and the people attending the banquet included the direct line, collateral lines, retainers of the Tyrell family, as well as lords and nobles from nearby, etc. During the banquet, singers and jesters took turns performing. The steps were similar to those at the Red Castle dinner. But unlike the banquet at the Red Castle, there were not that many people here. Each of the participants was full of etiquette and etiquette. The overall environment and atmosphere seemed elegant and peaceful, soothing the nerves and relaxing unconsciously. As the protagonist of the banquet, people around him would always turn their attention to him. Renly felt a little uncomfortable with this, but he had seen many storms and waves, and even killed 2 kings. He could still deal with it normally, and his every move was consistent. He didn't show the slightest trace of panic, but rather had an aristocratic demeanor that was not appropriate for his age, which surprised many people who were observing openly or covertly. However, this kind of surprise basically did not exceed normal emotions. Renly's disguise since he was a baby made Renly very good at controlling his own performance and not arousing excessive suspicion from those around him. There were many participants at the party, but only a few deserved attention. The heir to this castle, Willis Tyrell, is a gentle and intelligent teenage boy. His mother, who was born in the Hightower family in Old Town, has a beautiful face and dignified and elegant temperament. And his younger brother, Garland Tyrell, has the unique naughty and restless nature of a child, as well as an endearing simplicity. In addition, the direct descendants of the Tyrell family include the 2 babies, Loras and Marjorie, but these 2 are currently too young and have nothing worthy of attention. Of course, Renly did not ignore the most respected member of the Tyrell family, the mother of the Duke of Mace, the widow of the former old duke, and his future adoptive mother, Olenna Redwine. It was a thin, short old lady in a green robe, sitting at the head of the table, and her every move seemed crisp and clean. However, under the candlelight of the dining table, her sparse teeth were particularly obvious when she spoke. Your grandfather was a good man, and he married a Targaryen. When Renly came up to greet her, she said politely, as a matter of fact, they wanted me to marry a Targaryen. How many years ago was that? I can't remember clearly, and it doesn't matter. All in all, my kids had a great time in high court. Obviously she had no intention of saying anything more to her adopted son. Renly also said hello sensibly and did not stop to disturb him. Therefore, he did not hear the conversation that took place next. Do you understand? As the black-haired boy blended into the group of grandsons and playmates in the hall, the thin old lady turned her head and looked at her son standing behind her. What do you mean, mother? The tall Duke of Metz was stunned when he heard this. I mean, his grandfather and I were from the same era, you idiot. The old lady said bitterly, what do you think would make a 5 or 6-year-old child become my adopted son? Without my knowledge, you would give yourself a younger brother who is younger than your son. This His Excellency the Duke wanted to say that he was about the same age as Robert. What else could Robert's brother be if he wasn't his adopted brother? But he knew how difficult his mother was, so he simply said nothing. It's a pity that the other party has no intention of letting him go. I'm really curious about what your dead, demented father would think after knowing this. The old man rubbed his cheek and said. The previous words seemed to involve her few remaining rotten teeth, which made her expression become more and more dissatisfied. It doesn't matter, mother. The Duke of Metz noticed something was wrong, so he quickly answered cautiously. It's really nothing important. The old man's cheerful reply made the Duke speechless, but the words that followed made him feel the pressure again. Where's Jenna? She's just a stupid, fat little hen, and you actually want her to be the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. I thought this might, maybe be able to reverse our family's previous decline. You know, mother, if we... How could that dear ignore the lions that support him and come to get close to our group of thorny roses? Do you think he is an idiot like you? The old man interrupted his son unceremoniously. I'm not an idiot, mother. I almost succeeded, if I hadn't. If you're not an idiot, what are you? I am your son, mother. The Duke replied with a dissatisfied tone, emphasizing the word son. What I hate the most is your words. The old man replied with a toothache, because it makes me wonder if I accidentally broke my stomach when I was drunk? Otherwise, how could I have given birth to a demented son like you? The Duke was unable to answer this question, and he obviously had no intention of contradicting the old mother. After hearing this, he just sighed, turned around and prepared to leave, out of sight and out of mind. Seeing this, the old man suddenly grabbed the corner of his clothes and asked with a serious expression, Now look, everything you did in King's Landing has been spread. What do you think the Green Apple family will think? They are more or less just a wealthy knight family. As long as I give them some comfort, what else can they think? The Duke of Metz replied disapprovingly. Like comforting a dog. The old man asked harshly, What will the lords think of you treating them like a dog? No, a pack of dogs. How can this be called a joke? Well, although it is indeed true, isn't it true that Jenna has not become the queen? The engagement is still valid. I don't think this will have any impact. The Duke replied. You have to know that dogs can bite when they are anxious. The old man said with a sneer. Then what do you think we should do? The Duke of Metz said with some dissatisfaction, You asked me to apologize. The old man did not answer the question, but suddenly changed the subject. You wrote back before and said that someone took advantage of you. Yes, said the Duke of Metz, otherwise I wouldn't have had that thought. Apparently he was already looking for ways to excuse his behavior. Who is it? Have you found it? This. The Duke looked hesitant. At first, he was mainly focused on how to attack Robert, but he didn't pay much attention to this matter. We were short of manpower, and there were too many people in King's Landing at that time, so... You just need to answer whether I found it or not. The old lady rubbed her cheek and said, Do you think I just like hearing your excuses? No. The Duke of Metz immediately replied, There are no clues. Very good. I've been fooled for so long. I haven't even figured out who was fooled. The old man said, looking at the black-haired boy who was chatting and laughing with his grandson at the banquet, and sighed, not to mention the reputation of not being trustworthy and not respecting the vassals. I also attracted the attention of the lion. What's your harvest, a little Baratheon kid? What good can he do besides giving me toothache? Did you bring him here to piss me off? That's proof enough that Robert. What do you think we rely on for being the defeated party but not losing much benefit? That dear's favor. It's better than nothing. The Duke argued with embarrassment. That's true. The old lady nodded in agreement, making Mace Tyrell, his son, speechless and choked again, but the next words that came into his ears made him look solemn. What does it mean that a Lannister must pay its debts? The old man asked pointedly. Apparently she was referring to the deterioration in the relationship between the Tyrells and the Lannisters during this incident. How can we be afraid of them? The Duke of the Reach replied righteously. If there are no accidents, the next generation of kings will have half the blood of lions in their bodies, and our good neighbor to the east has now become the Stannis who has been surrounded by you for nearly a year. The old man reminded him, What are you going to do about it? Do nothing and then wait and see if these small problems turn into big problems. The Duke of Metz did not speak, as if he did not think much about these things. The old man sighed and said, Can't find who it is? Very good, the sea monster seems to be quite honest recently. This is not possible. Take it out for me. Mother, you mean the Iron Islands? The Duke of Mace was stunned when he heard this. What does this have to do with us and the Lannister? Use your brain, my dear son. The old man sighed and said, what good will it do you to make me mad? Chapter 131. If you are not in the habit of getting up late, Lord Renly, a servant will knock on the door on time before breakfast and take you to the dining room. After the welcome banquet, Willis Tyrell, the heir to Highgarden and the next generation Duke of the River Bend, personally sent Renly to the residence arranged for him in the castle. Walking in the quiet white corridor, this young man with ear-length brown hair said to the black-haired boy beside him, after breakfast, it is the teaching time of Bachelor Lomies. Bachelor Lomies, you have already attended the banquet. I've seen him before, so I won't introduce him too much. Currently, he will teach me and Garland in 2 parts. Garland is still learning to read, and I have a slight interest in stargazing. If you like it too, Lord Renly, you can join me. Of course, it is best to plan according to your current academic progress. Maybe we can consult the bachelor tomorrow morning. Just call me Renly, no need to be so polite. Renly said. You are my grandmother's adopted son and the Duke of Dragonstone. I can't be so rude. The other party replied, and then said slightly jokingly, unless you want me to call you uncle. Renly laughed when he heard this, and the other party continued to speak. I need to learn etiquette with my mother for some time before noon. I think you will join me for this. In the afternoon, my father will meet with the lords from all over the River Bend who have come to ask for instructions, and he will also deal with some civilian affairs in our family's territory. During this period, I will always follow him. If you are interested, sir, you can come with us. There is no need to be shy. Father has ordered this before. The young man speaks softly and has soft eyes. He looks very hospitable. He is wearing a brown leather coat that is very common among nobles. Except for the golden rose embroidered on his chest, he looks like a knight's attendant. According to what Renly learned at the banquet, he was indeed a knight's apprentice and was currently learning the ways of knighthood from the instructors of Highgarden. I will be practicing riding and spearmanship in the afternoon. I'm sorry that you can't join me, Lord Renly. You're not yet old enough. But you might be able to practice swordsmanship with my brother Garland, of course. Your body can withstand a certain level of training. If you are interested, we can test it tomorrow. Renly nodded when he heard the words, but said nothing. The other party continued to give some advice on the basic necessities of Highgarden. As he spoke, the golden rose on his chest slowly bloomed in Renly's sight, like a book following the wind. And moving books. Finally, when they arrived at the door of the residence, the polite brown-haired boy bowed to the boy. It is a pleasure to meet you, Lord Renly, and welcome to Highgarden. Renly returned the gift, then watched the other person leave and touched his chin. He felt that this Veloz was much more interesting than his father. He was already quite mature and steady at a young age, and his attitude was sincere and friendly. He did not have the pampering and arrogant temperament of the children of the great aristocracy at all. It's just a little too polite. Thinking about it, he looked back to the room where he was assigned. This room is much larger than his small room in King's Landing, but this does not lose the exquisiteness of the room. Looking at it, the milky white marble floor reflects the hazy light under the candlelight, and the surface is paved with brand new green mirror. The carpet was neat and square, without a trace of dust. The boy standing at the door looked to the left side of his body, and the carved wooden door of the bathroom came into view, which was no different from the Red Fort. In addition, there are reading tables, bedside tables, fireplaces, bookcases, exquisite silver-plated round mirrors, wardrobes, and even wine cabinets. At a glance, you can see that all kinds of furniture are available in the room. The bed placed deep in the room is not too big. But it is enough to sleep him alone. The surface of the bed is covered with silver silk, with a goose feather mattress underneath. Light blue curtains cover the entire bed, making it look elegant and clean. Everything you see is beautiful. The only pity is that the glass windows here are not as big as the balcony floor-to-ceiling windows of the Red Fort. Although they are not small, they look like an oval mirror because the glass is not pure. The moonlight from outside penetrates in and shines on the milky white ground, making it appear hazy and trance-like. This room is at the top of a pure white tower. When you open the window and look out, you can see a vast wilderness outside the huge castle. Now it is shrouded in the silent starry sky, and the fields of roses on the wilderness are swaying in the night wind. It is said that the fields east of Highgarden are covered with golden roses like the Tyrell family's crest. The light is dim tonight, so it is difficult to see clearly, but Renly is looking forward to what he will see when the sun slowly blooms from the east. What a beautiful view you will get! All in all, as a new arrival, he is very satisfied with everything so far, whether it is the people here or the environment here. It would be better if this thing didn't exist. Muttering, he sat on the soft bedside and raised his left hand. At this time, he was wearing a black velvet glove on his left hand, which made his originally petite hand look much longer. Now, the joints of the glove were constantly trembling. At a glance, it seemed that his fingers were moving around. But it wasn't actually Renly who was moving. After frowning, he took off the glove, and the change happened in vain. Under the black glove was originally a thin white silk glove, but now that it was exposed, it seemed to have become a living creature that could move. After squirming and breaking free from the boy's hand, the white glove flapped its wings like a bird and kept flying around the room, looking very panicked. Obviously, a glove cannot have any eyes, but after flapping for a while, the bird clearly found the exit in the room that was deliberately opened by the boy, so it quickly rushed over, and its back disappeared from sight not long after. Renly then closed the open window tightly, blocking the cold wind outside. Then he thought about it, turned around and dragged out a box under the bed, and opened it with the black iron key hanging around his neck. This box was his trash can, which Renly also brought when he left King's Landing, and was brought to the room by the servants in advance when he attended the banquet. But now his behavior was not to check whether there were any missing items in it, but to observe something in it. In this wooden box, there was a sealed glass bottle. The slightly blurred glass seemed to be less transparent, but a grey-haired mouse could be vaguely seen. A dull mouse that did not move except for breathing instinctively. However, it was not just a mouse. After observing for a few times, Renly took out the glass bottle, then sat on the ground without caring about his image, holding the bottle with both hands and began to shake it vigorously. With a crackling sound, the hazy grey figure was shaken around like a mess, but no matter how it was shaken, there was no screaming sound inside, so when the shaking stopped in the end, the mouse did not realize that it had turned into a petite white-haired hen. Renly saw this and opened the bottle mouth and poked it inside with a dagger. The hen looked up at him and made a clucking sound, but there was no other reaction, so Renly closed the lid and started shaking it again. So the hen turned into a toad, the toad turned into an apple, and the apple turned into an octopus. With the constant shaking, the creature in the bottle changed in 1,000 ways, like a ball of dough that could be kneaded and changed at will, and the only things that remained unchanged were its dull expression and some corresponding instincts. Until the thing in the bottle turned into a floating grey energy ball, Renly stopped, and then stared thoughtfully at the grey substance swaying in the air for a moment before slowly turning back into a mouse. The mouse is actually its original appearance, and the reason for its current transformation is very simple. He fed it the sprout that grew on the cushion of the carriage before. About the listing, today's editorial notice will be delayed, so the listing originally scheduled for this Friday is invalid. If nothing unexpected happens, it will be listed next Friday. Chapter 132. The journey from King's Landing to Highgarden was quite long, but Renly did not do nothing during this period. Wearing gloves to block the attack of the mark on his left hand was always a bad idea. If he could not completely solve the chaos caused by the mark, Renly thought that he might never be able to live a normal life again. So he has been doing experiments in secret during this period. If you want to solve the mark, you must first understand it. Renly's first step is to do this. And the mouse in the jar in front of him is a process he understands. In addition, he also refers to the water cup that turned into sand, the soft dagger, the stone-like button, the bird-like gloves. The mark attacked many times along the way, which also brought him sufficient experimental materials and reference items. So he came to many conclusions. The most basic point is that the things produced after the mark attacks are divided into two categories. Living and non-living, or moving and non-moving. The moving things include the chicken leg at the beginning, his belt, his velvet cape that suddenly came alive on the road, and of course the flying bird that the gloves turned into. These things look very strange. At first, Renly thought that it might be the mark that gave these items the ability to come alive, but he later came to another conclusion. That is, the mark stuffed various animals into these things. This speculation has been hinted since the belt. Although he was a little absent-minded when he went to the toilet, and although the belt ran very fast, Renly still saw the movement of the belt after it changed. It crawled like a snake. Later on the road, his cloak also came alive, and its appearance after coming alive was more obvious. It was gathered and folded into shape, like a hollow cloth pony. The flying bird of the gloves later was similar to this situation. In order to be more sure of his guess, Renly in the tent tried to stab the most conspicuous pony to death. Although the cloak horse was wrapped in air and there was no effect, when his dagger pierced the surface of the cloak fabric, the monster struggled violently as if it was really pierced, and it looked very scary. Then, when it was completely dead and turned into a dead cloak with a hole, Renly touched the body of a real pony. Invisible body. He determined that this kind of attack of the mark was not to give life to dead things, but to stuff living animals into it. Then the question is, how is this unreasonable stuffing done? Where did those animals come from? Were they moved from the surroundings out of thin air? Or is there something else he doesn't understand? Many questions troubled Renly very much, and when he found a linear flower growing on the sleeve of his arm holding the dagger, he understood another point. Although the horse died, the power that caused it to be stuffed into the cloak did not disappear, but was transferred to his sleeve, and then the sleeve was stuffed. If this is the case, the conclusion is very simple. The process of the mark is to stuff one existence into another. However, the mark is not limited to the living creatures that are stuffed in, but also the buttons that turned into stone and the cups that turned into sand. If these two are considered, it seems that it is not just stuffing. It is a replacement. Replacing one existence with another. The buttons and cups were replaced very completely, so their appearance changed, while the belts, chicken legs, gloves and cloaks were not completely replaced, so they could only wear the original appearance and do things that are completely inconsistent with their appearance. Let's not talk about the source of this replacement, how to replace, the survival problem after the replacement, and why there is such a strange situation as incomplete replacement. Simply understanding the replacement still makes Renly feel relieved. Then he had another doubt. If it is really just replacement, then what is the situation of the grass growing from the cowhide cushion? Did this grass replace a piece of the cushion's epidermis? Renly thought it might be so before, but when he did this experiment with the grass and the mouse, when the mouse in the bottle underwent such a transformation, Renly overturned, or increased his guess. The ability of the chaos mark is not limited to replacement, but also alienation, a very inexplicable alienation. Therefore, he summed up two conclusions. The onset of the mark is just releasing two kinds of energy, one energy is replacement, and the other is alienation. The second conclusion is that there is only one kind of energy released by the onset of the mark. After this energy appears, it will spontaneously integrate into the object it touches, and then a replacement effect will occur, replacing one existence or completely or incompletely with another existence. But there is also a small probability that it may cause the object to mutate. This mutation caused grass to grow on the cushion, and the mouse that ate the grass became a magical creature with a variety of changes. Although this variety seemed useless, the associations it triggered made Renly feel completely different about the chaos mark. The time of the mark's energy release was uncontrollable, but after it was released, this energy was basically fixed. Completely replaced things did not contain energy, but by killing incompletely replaced things, this energy could be released a second time. In addition, he can also control situations like the alienated grass. In other words, if the assumption is correct, he can actively create strange creatures like this mouse. What's the use of this? Renly hasn't thought about it yet, or he's not sure yet. Due to the uncontrollable secondary emission of that invisible energy and its uncertainty, Renly is afraid that the energy will penetrate into his body when he does it himself. So except for killing a foal for the experiment at the beginning, he only fed a mouse with the grass along the way, and did not create other test targets. In other words, he is not sure whether the energy emission is 1 or 2, nor is he sure whether the specific function of the alienated thing is just to change the appearance like this mouse, or whether it will have other abilities. Under the candlelight in the exquisite room, the black-haired boy slumped on the cold ground, looking down at the tattoo on his left wrist thoughtfully. A mouse will have such a wonderful change after being alienated, and what will happen if this energy really penetrates into the human body? The next morning, after having a hearty breakfast with the Tyrell family, Renly was taken to the maester's room by two brothers, one big and one small, to start planning his future study goals. The maester serving the castle of Highgarden is called Lomies. He doesn't look old, only in his 40s, with a tough face. Standing under the only window in the room, his bald head is particularly obvious. Judging from the remaining hair on both sides, he should have been a blonde handsome guy before, but unfortunately the cruel reality made him reveal the state of an old man too early. I am good at ravens, languages, history, astronomy, and medicine. I also have a certain understanding of taming hounds and falcons. After greeting, the bald maester claimed so. Then I wonder what Lord Renly learned when he was at Storm's End and the Red Keep. You basically don't need to study heraldry anymore, and the basics of common speech are almost there. Renly replied, there's nothing else. In fact, he knows a lot of things, but those things can't be mentioned, but these 2 points alone are enough to prove his hard work. After all, these 2 kinds of knowledge basically run through the childhood of every noble child. Under normal circumstances, a child under the age of 6 would not be so learned. You don't need to study anymore, are you sure? Maester Lomies frowned when he heard this, feeling that the child liked to brag a little. Heraldry involves the entire lord family of Westeros, Lord Renly, we have to learn more than just the heraldry related to the Stormlands. Renly shrugged. The other party then took out a book of heraldry and began to test Renly carefully. Where is Bear Island located in Westeros? In the north, in the western sea of Winterfell, in a harbour called the Frost Bay. Renly answered, and without asking, he said, the Mormont family rules Bear Island. The family emblem is a big bear in the green jungle. The family motto is to stand tall. The current head of the Mormont family is Yoram Mormont, who inherited the status from his father Jeor Mormont. The family's original history. The endless words made the maester nod frequently. Then he asked about the remote territory of the Vale, the weak families of the Iron Islands, the mountain lords of Dorne, and even some extinct ancient families. The original unbelief gradually changed. The brown-haired boy Willis, who was standing aside and listening quietly, finally couldn't help but look at the fat boy who was about the same age as Renly, or 1 year older than Renly. Seeing this, the other party pursed his lips and muttered in a low voice before his brother said anything. I've tried very hard, but what can I do if I can't remember? The voice was not loud, but it stopped the question and answer appropriately. Maester Lomies, who was sitting behind the desk, glanced at the little fat man, coughed dryly, and then said to Renly, okay, my lord, you really don't need to continue to study heraldry in depth, and I won't test your reading and writing of the common language. Then let's get to the point. What do you hope to learn from me? History and language. Renly thought for a while and answered. Although the copy world he entered seemed to be able to be changed, there was only one example, and Renly could not be sure whether the world he entered next time would be connected to the previous one. Of course, he did not dare to guarantee when he could enter next time. The dagger he brought was always silent, and the fragrance was always so faint. It has been almost 2 months since he got it, and it has not increased much. At the same time, although he entered a new environment, this castle obviously did not have the rich background of King's Landing, which allowed Renly to smell the fragrance. As for languages, in addition to the common speech, I am also good at High Valyrian, Low Valyrian, and the dialects and slangs of the 9 free trade cities. In addition, I am fairly proficient in Dothraki and trade speech, and I am also basically familiar with Cartine and Lhazareen. The more special one is the Old North speech, which is a very ancient language. It is said that the wildlings outside the Great Wall are still using it. My lord, are you going to learn all of them, or just a few of them? High Valyrian was the common language of the ancient Valyrian freehold. After the destruction of the Valyrian freehold, this language was basically unused. However, Renly was more interested in it because he learned from Rhaenys that this language involved dragons. Low Valyrian is basically equivalent to the common language of the 9 free trade cities in the East Continent. Of course, the Low Valyrian used by each city-state has a certain localization and dialect, so it needs to be classified in detail. Renly, who has the dream of being a traveler, has long wanted to explore the East Continent, and naturally would not let go of this language. As for other languages such as Dothraki and ancient languages, he has no interest in them. He is not interested in the barbaric nomads in his memory, nor does he want to go to the dangerous far north to talk to a group of wild people, still a little bit, so he does not plan to spend time learning it. He is somewhat interested in the last trade language, because it is a professional jargon commonly used among sailors and pirates around the world. After expressing his own thoughts, the bald scholar nodded, and Renly's studies in Highgarden were basically finalized. However, no one knew that because of the discovery of the left hand, Renly was actually preparing to learn another subject besides these, a subject that most scholars thought was useless. Magic. Chapter 133. Under the gloomy sky, several multi-masted longships slowly moved forward on the grey sea. The cold autumn wind blew, and the swollen sails made the nettle whip pattern on them particularly obvious. Standing on the deck of the Meditation, Iron Axe, wearing a black leather armor, looked at the vague shadow of the island in the distance. The extreme desire in his heart made his eyes narrow unconsciously. "Captain Iron Axe, I still think it is inappropriate for us to go to sea without permission in violation of King Baron's ban." The middle-aged first mate behind him leaned in and whispered, his weather-beaten face full of worry. "Even the drowned priests can't stop the Ironborn from going out to sea. That is the natural right given to us by the drowned god, and no one can deprive us of it." The black-clad captain, Iron Axe, snorted coldly upon hearing this. How can Baron compare to the drowned god? But if King Baron knows about this, will he kill all of us? The captain's question made the first mate's face change, but then he laughed dryly and comforted himself. Although King Baron is not as gentle as the old king, he doesn't seem to be too harsh. "So what are you afraid of? Baron hasn't even secured his position as Seastone yet. How much spare energy do you think he has to take care of our affairs?" Iron Axe in Black said with a grin. "Besides, we are just going out to fish, but we can't do anything." As he said this, his eyes looked covetously at the faint shadow of the island. "No need to use force, as long as you show up around the sea area of the island, you can get a lot of money. This is a very cost-effective deal for Captain Iron Axe, who has been ruled peacefully for a long time and is even poor. However, in fact, he has another idea in his heart, or they still yearn for the ancient way that the Iron race relied on for survival before the establishment of the Targaryen dynasty, which is the way of burning, killing and plundering, rather than guarding the poor broken island in the sea to fish and mine. Unfortunately, it is not the time yet." Thinking so regretfully, a white shadow suddenly passed by Iron Axe's eyes. The strange appearance made the black-clothed captain raise his head suddenly. After a few glances, he frowned and then signaled his deputy to take the bow and aim. He was aiming at a white bird, which was now soaring around the three-masted sail. Its leisurely appearance seemed leisurely and comfortable, and he didn't realize that he had been stared at. So when an arrow whizzed past, it was nailed to the wooden pole of the sail without any reaction time. After struggling for a while, it seemed to become motionless. This precise archery technique made several sailors not far away cheer loudly. Captain Iron Axe laughed and scolded them a few words. Then, under his order, a sailor climbed up the mast like a monkey and rushed to the place where the arrow hit. At first, the sailor did not understand why his leader insisted on him picking up the arrow after shooting a seabird to death, but when he gradually climbed to the target, he was shocked to find that it was not a bird that was shot, but a glove. A small white glove that was swaying in the sea breeze. "It's really strange. What kind of wind can blow it so much like a bird?" The muttering in his heart did not hinder the young sailor's actions. He held the wooden pole with one hand, and used his other hand to forcefully remove the arrow that nailed the glove, and then bit the glove in his mouth. Then the young sailor began to climb down. During this time, he felt that the thing in his mouth seemed to be moving abnormally, but the sea breeze was strong around him, so the sailors didn't pay much attention to it. So after jumping back to the deck, he handed the glove fluttering in the wind to his captain. However, just as he was surprised, the sailors around were all surprised. "Did you hide the bird and use this glove to fool our Captain Iron Axe? Are you a fool, Doran? Look at the material of this glove, it is much more precious than a bird. Then why is it a glove?" "How do I know?" The black-clad captain standing at the end of the deck ignored the crew's discussion, but looked down at the white glove in his hand and frowned without saying a word. "I don't know if it's an illusion, he always feels that the thing in his hand seems to be moving by itself, not the wind around." Thinking about it, he saw the glove in his hand suddenly flipped and fell towards the deck, and he quickly reached out and grabbed it tightly. Just as the black-clad captain did this, he suddenly felt an inexplicable palpitation. After a moment of trance, he couldn't help but look at the many crew members behind him. An inexplicable thought emerged in his mind. Gudeo is not dead. The sound of wooden swords colliding in a courtyard somewhere in the castle was dull and loud. The two boys were wearing armor made of wood chips and were practicing with sweat on their heads. They might have consumed a lot of physical strength. Their every move at this time seemed very clumsy. Hurry up, Master Garland, what's wrong with you today? Didn't you eat enough?" A middle-aged coach wearing brown and black leather armor and trousers stood not far away with his chest folded. His light brown hair was tied into a ponytail behind his head. His brown eyes were fixed on the movements of the two boys, and he scolded them from time to time. At the same time, as the training atmosphere in the courtyard became heated, clear and leisurely harp notes floated from above, mixed with the sounds of weapons clashing and footsteps, inexplicably giving a feeling of background music of battle. What a stupid person, Tob. Why do you always hit him on the arm when you have the chance to hit him on the head? Do you think this is a child's play? If you were still so restrained during the real battle, you would have been killed by the enemy long ago. Died. The coach's voice was a little angry. The boy who was scolded turned red after hearing the words and felt quite ashamed. However, his opponent did not have an easy time during this training either. His fat body was already a bit clumsy, and the coach's mean temperament was even worse. I would taunt him from time to time. Master Garland, do you know why the pig raised by Wilder is always beaten? Why? Because it doesn't know how to hide. The fat boy looked unhappy when he heard this, and even felt a little aggrieved. I can't help but listen to Renly's harp, so I'm distracted. As he spoke, he glanced at the guy sitting on the wooden railing in the attic diagonally above. The black-haired boy who was the same age as him, but did not need to train and instead played the harp in his arms leisurely, was so annoying in the eyes of the fat boy. Don't make excuses, Master Garland. The sounds on the real battlefield are much harsher than these. The instructor said while looking at the green-eyed boy opposite the fat boy. You see, although he can't let go, Tob is not affected by those sounds. The instructor's words made the boy named Tob blush again and again. After carefully looking at the fat boy opposite him, he looked diagonally upward at his young master as if asking for help. As a civilian child, he was already very cautious when he was arranged to spar with children from a noble family. The coach's modest praise made him even more panic-stricken. Although this kind of sparring has been going on for more than 2 months, the shy boy is still very nervous about it. However, facing his gaze, the young master diagonally above him just showed him an encouraging smile, and then spit out a cheerful musical note from the harp in his hand. So Tob had no choice but to continue sparring with an uneasy mood. The sound of the harp sounded continuously again. It seemed to be an elegant tune with a rich rhythm, and it seemed to be played randomly. The 2 boys who were concentrating on the battle ignored it, or tried to ignore it, but they passed by on the attic corridor. Some men and women cannot ignore it. So along with the praise or attention, the experience bar of someone's bard profession was slowly increasing in an imperceptible manner. Yes, increase. Although it was not shown on the system panel, Renly, who was immersed in playing, could still vaguely feel the inconspicuous power that accompanied the attention of the people around him. This was the same as when he was practicing alone. The situation is very different. Renly believed that this was the right path for him to advance professionally. The original method of practicing alone was the wrong way to go. After all, the skills included in his knight profession are basically not low, but the level is still entry level. Coupled with the situation he faced when he obtained the knight profession, he could easily guess one of them. Some joints. Only when doing relevant behaviors will the corresponding occupation he holds have the nutrients to improve. Renly was not sure why this was the case, just as he was unable to understand the specific condition of his left hand more than 2 months before the experiment was carried out. Regarding this extraordinary thing, he only vaguely guessed that it might be something like the power of belief, but only God knew the specifics. Anyway, he can feel that if this continues, his career will be promoted sooner or later, so he doesn't pay much attention to the question of why, but when exactly he will be promoted is another unknown matter. Thinking about it, his moving fingers suddenly stopped, and then he quickly shook off his previous careless look, sat upright, and began to play with his head lowered, pretending to be immersed in the ocean of music. It's a pity that his behavior was not hidden from other people's eyes. The silver-haired woman who was walking towards this direction not far away frowned, and then her footsteps quickened, causing a group of maids behind her to pick up their skirts and catch up. Behave properly and not like a country scoundrel, Renly. The woman approached and said this to the black-haired boy. Then, without waiting for a response, she continued to say seriously, "Follow me. Although the time is wrong, I need to teach you the etiquette of sitting posture again." Renly blinked when he heard this, and then followed her away obediently. A fat boy below saw this situation and let out a burst of gloating laughter, and then was scolded by the mean coach. It is hard to imagine that during the 2 months spent in Highgarden, the most difficult person to deal with was not the famous Queen of Thorns, but the dignified and elegant-looking Duchess. Chapter 134. Hand posture should be relaxed and natural, not stiff like a piece of wood. Yes, relax, that's it. Don't raise your head too much, and crossing your legs is absolutely forbidden. Your eyes. Don't always stare at other people's eyes, it will make people nervous. It's best to do this when you express your opinions or listen. The most important thing is to keep your clothes clean at all times, and never sit on wooden railings or dirty places. Servants can wash your clothes, but you have to pay attention to your image yourself. A rigorous female voice sounded from a bright and spacious room. The black-haired boy honestly corrected his sitting posture according to the words of the silver-haired woman opposite. That focused look couldn't be better at learning. After just more than 2 months of contact, the Duchess basically understood the laziness of this person's character every time he learned etiquette from her. He seemed to be very perfect, but in fact, when he really left the course, he was casual as if he had never learned those things at all, which made people feel helpless. Of course, due to the fact that this boy is less than 7 years old, this situation is actually very normal, or the boy has performed well enough, but Lady Ellie feels that her husband's adopted brother can do better, but she doesn't think about it. I understand how you feel, Renly. It's very tiring to maintain a polite sitting posture at all times, but as long as you get used to them and turn them into your own habits, then everything will be natural. You should try to do this, and I believe you can do it more easily. Except for the serious female voice, there was no other sound in the spacious room. The autumn wind outside the window blew in with the withered yellow leaves, and it made a trivial sound when it hit the nearby paintings. A man and a woman stood in the Myrish-style portrait. The man was Mace Tyrell, the Duke of the River Bay, who was dressed in a gorgeous dress, and the woman was naturally the Duchess in front of him. With silver hair and a short dress, the lifelike portrait was hung on a large light green feather bed, and the surrounding furnishings were casual and natural. Obviously, this is the residence of the Duke and Duchess. In the past, Renly would come here with Willis, the heir of Highgarden, and his younger brother to learn the etiquette of the nobility. Now that he was being taught a lesson alone, he was the only one left. The teaching lasted for a long time until it was getting dark outside and a big-breasted young nurse came hurriedly with a crying baby girl in her arms. "Madam, please think of a way quickly. Miss Marjorie has been crying non-stop and I can't comfort her no matter how hard I try." The nurse's anxious voice accompanied the sharp cry of the baby girl, causing the Duchess, who had been serious before, to suddenly run over with a nervous look on her face. Renly, who was standing next to her, also came closer and curiously raised his feet to look at the pink baby in the swaddling clothes. At first glance, he felt that the baby was a little ugly. The voice is not small. Muttering secretly, Renly bowed to the Duchess appropriately and left. Then, when he walked out of the room, he met another person who was also closely related to him in his memory. The beautiful child with big eyes and thick brown hair was led by a servant to stand outside the door. When he saw the black-haired boy step out, he greeted him in a baby voice. "Brother Nanley." "You should call him uncle," Renly corrected. "Brother?" the child asked blankly, as if he didn't understand the meaning of the word uncle. Renly rubbed his forehead, causing him to laugh foolishly. As a result, the Duchess, who was worried about her daughter crying in the room, happened to hear it, so she looked over. The child was so scared that he quickly shut his mouth, and the black-haired boy didn't want to tease this little gay anymore. After a dry cough, he turned around and left in a hurry. Many servants in the corridor greeted him respectfully when they saw him, and occasionally they could see members of the Tyrell family, who were also quite polite to him. Renly responded in turn. Life in Highgarden is simple but fulfilling. After getting up in the morning and having breakfast, he goes to the Maester Tower to learn languages and history, and then goes to the Duchess with 2 companions to learn noble etiquette. In this way, the morning tasks are basically completed. In the afternoon, Renly occasionally goes to the government hall at the front of the castle to listen to the Duke of Mace dealing with government affairs related to his vassals and knights, and spends more time practicing his bard profession. If there is a dinner party in the evening, he will attend the dinner party. If there is no dinner party, he will hide in the room to read books. The gloves are very useful. The occasional accidents on his left hand can basically keep him calm at this time, and more often he is at peace. Last month, his 6th name day came quietly, and he didn't tell anyone, but the people of the Tyrell family seemed to have known it for a long time. The celebration dinner personally arranged by the silver-haired Duchess was grand and warm. Master Crescent of Storm's End also wrote him a letter after his name day, congratulating Renly for growing 1 year older and asking about his academic problems. The old man is now assisting the acting Lord of Storm's End in managing the affairs of Stormlands, while Stannis, the Duke of Stormlands, has been in King's Landing and has not returned. In Renly's territory, Dragonstone also sent a letter by Raven to report the basic situation. A maester named Kance wrote it personally. Kance was a new maester assigned to the citadel after Renly was knighted. I have never met him and have never heard of this name, but the letter he wrote was concise, sharp, and decisive. In general, there is basically nothing to worry about in the outside world. Now he only needs to concentrate on staying in Highgarden, the first castle in the River Bay, to grow and learn, or do experiments. This is in line with Renly's expectations. Life in the castle is also uneventful, except that he always has trouble sleeping every now and then, because he always feels that someone is sleeping next to him, but he suddenly wakes up several times to check but does not find any trace of anyone. After a while, Renly feels that he has encountered a haunted incident again. He has not made much progress in the left-hand experiment, because he is still worried that the secondary release will affect himself, so he has been hoping that there will be a situation like the last time with the grass, but it didn't happen. This may be because wearing gloves limits the use of that energy, or it may be that the mark has been emitting replacement energy during this period, rather than mutation. In short, there is no progress in related experiments. After more than 2 months of study, his etiquette has been improved from the original LV1 to LV2. Long-term historical learning has not allowed him to acquire any historical skills, but one day he quietly gained a legend and anecdote LV1. The language aspect is a big project, and there is no progress for a while. Putting aside the obvious studies, the magic he is studying on his own at this time also makes him confused. There is not much information about magic in Westeros. If it weren't for the huge library of High Court, he might not be able to find even one related book. However, even if there are professional books, he still feels confused, because they contain various professional terms and a lot of paragraphs with difficult meanings. After looking around, the only thing he can be sure of is that in this world, there is no supernatural energy such as magic elements, and the wizards arrange rituals and cast spells, which are not connected to some power in nature. But God, our healer, the Lord of Light, the three-headed God, the Black Goat, Simothy and Siso, the Lord of the Sky, the Lady of Waves, the Stone Bull of Pharos. Renly is unfamiliar with all the names except the Lord of Light. These gods do not exist in Westeros. The belief in the 7 gods occupies this ancient land, and the only heresy belongs to the old gods of the north. Chapter 135. Magic seems to have suddenly turned into theology, but when it comes to magic, Renly can still be considered to have a general concept. After all, among other things, various fantasy novels in the past life have always described magic, there are all kinds of ideas. But God? Renly scratched his head at this. In the past, when he was at Storm's End, he had asked Maester Crescent about magic. The man replied that this was a useless knowledge. Even those in Old Town were proficient in it. There were only a few maesters who chose this course to study. Being laughed at. Old Town is already the center of knowledge in Westeros, and even there are few people who master this knowledge, certainly not in the castle of Highgarden. But he couldn't understand it just by reading the book on his own. I originally thought that by learning this knowledge and combining it with the special power of my left hand, there might be some strange chemical reaction, but now it seems that this path is not feasible at all. If he doesn't understand, even if he can understand those books, he can't go and believe in some god. Renly finally gave up and began to focus his attention elsewhere. Learn knowledge, etiquette, perform and play, and occasionally activate your left hand to see if you can stimulate different experimental materials. The days in High Court were dull and fulfilling, but after living here for nearly 3 months, he suddenly heard a piece of news that made him feel quite strange. It was a gloomy afternoon in the government hall outside the castle. A scout was reporting the news to Duke Tyrell, who was sitting on the oak chair in the hall. His words made the young duke touch the ruby ring on his left hand. He couldn't help but pause, and then asked repeatedly, "How many Ironborn longships attacked Fairy Isle?" "Yes, sir." The scout, who was wearing a leather armor and worn by the weather, replied, "But there were not many of them. They just took advantage of the chaos and robbed some property and women before retreating. They did not cause much damage to the locals. Fairy Island is a fiefdom of the Farman family in the west. It is not too far away from Casterly Rock of the Lord Lannister family. It is naturally protected by the Lannister fleet. However, at this time, the people of the Iron Islands dared to launch an attack. The dozen or so people in the tidy hall looked at each other in disbelief, unable to understand why this behavior occurred. That's so presumptuous. Do those iron bastards still think that the current era is 300 years ago? I really want to see how that lion handles this. The knights and retainers under his command were talking a lot, and the Duke, who was at the top of the list, was also brooding over this, unconsciously recalling his mother's words a while ago and his subsequent actions in his mind. But that shouldn't be the case. How could they be so crazy? He couldn't help but ask, does Balon have a rebellious heart? Our insider is here to report. This should be the private decision of the attacker's captain. The scout replied, it is said that King Balon is also very angry about this. A retainer with a black beard nodded when he heard this and said, Balon Greyjoy has just sat on the throne of Seastone not long ago. He has not yet consolidated his position, and it is impossible to provoke him at this juncture due to emotion and reason. Western Territory. But since His Majesty Robert came to the throne, no one from the Iron Islands has come to swear allegiance. Another person pointed out, Balon should have gone to King's Landing and bowed the knee to the new king, but he just didn't. Maybe he really has a rebellious streak. Garth, the steward of the High Court standing beside the Duke, said, those iron bastards think about restoring their ancient ways all day long, but they don't know that the current era is different from the past, with that kind of lawless robbery. There is no possibility of existence, provoking the unified Seven Kingdoms? It's just ouch. Before he finished speaking, he couldn't help but let out a loud stinky fart, and the entire meeting hall suddenly became silent. Everyone reacted quickly and closed their mouths tightly, or suppressed their breathing and looked up at the ceiling. Garth, the steward of the High Court, is the uncle of the young Duke. He is nicknamed Chubby. He has a round face, rosacea, and a fat belly. He has a bad stomach and can't help but fart. Everyone has become accustomed to this, including the person involved. Smiling without any embarrassment. As a result, the atmosphere remained dull and tacit, and no one continued to speak until the wind blowing from outside the hall swept away the stench. If he has that intention, I'm afraid he doesn't have the energy to spare. Blackbeard's retainers said, a group of crazy drowned men have suddenly appeared in the Iron Islands recently, claiming to be the holy warriors under the sons of the drowned god. They believe that succumbing to the Iron Throne is simply a shame for the entire Iron race. They surrendered to Tanger during the Conquest War. The Greyjoy family of Lean is even more disgraceful, so they are calling on the Ironborn to resist the rule of Greyjoy and the Iron Throne. Under such circumstances, it is unlikely that Greyjoy will become rebellious. Son of the Drowned God. This title made everyone curious. Although not everyone studied history, and few knew the history of the Iron Islands, as the saying goes, the people who know you best may be your enemies, and the nobles of the Reach are exactly the same. The Iron Islands belong to a 1,000-year feud. That was a character from hundreds of years ago. The fat steward of the High Court said funnily, no matter how old the Iron Bastard is, it is impossible for him to still follow the liar who died more than 200 years ago. Are they crazy? Maybe you are really crazy, otherwise why would you attack Fairy Island? Ironborn are all lunatics. The black-haired boy did not listen carefully to the subsequent discussions. Instead, he stood quietly on the right side of the Duke with the brown-haired boy and bowed his head in deep thought. Although a long time had passed, he had only experienced 3 copies in total, so it was impossible for him to forget his first time. It can even be said that he personally erased the son of the drowned god who deceived people. In the original history, the son of the drowned god was also beheaded during the reign of King Aenus, and he also died a miserable death. But that was nearly 300 years ago. How come he, or his followers, have appeared now? Did the original plot also have such a thing? Renly carefully recalled his past life memories. Apart from the education and experience after reincarnation, he probably only knew about a eunuch and a psychopath in the Iron Islands. Through the eunuchs of the Greyjoy family who were raised in the north, he could barely remember that the Iron Islands seemed to have once launched a rebellion against the Baratheon dynasty. But he didn't know how the rebellion happened and the process during it. Obviously, his golden finger was not Beidou Encyclopedia. Due to the vague memories of his previous life after reincarnation, he even recalled sulfur, nitrate, and charcoal for a long time before he remembered them, and then failed to develop them, not to mention the world background setting of a bad TV series. He didn't get the answer to this question in the end, and could only classify it as something that would happen in this world. However, for some reason, Renly always had an inexplicable sense of déjà vu in his heart, as if something was wrong. Where? He pondered and thought hard, but couldn't figure it out. In the days after the attack on Fairy Island, the situation on the entire continent was undercurrent, but it had no effect on someone in the castle. After nearly a month, he accidentally heard a related news. It is said that King Balan of the Iron Islands wrote a letter to King Robert on the Iron Throne, claiming that the civil strife in the Iron Islands prevented him from fully controlling his vassals, but he had personally beheaded the captain and crew who plundered Fairy Island. King Balan claimed that he would do his best to quell the strife and then give a satisfactory explanation to the Queen's family. At the same time, he also claimed that he would do King Robert's order to go to King's Landing to swear allegiance as long as the rebellion was suppressed. It seems that the new Iron King is quite honest and does not seem to want to rebel against the Iron Throne. However, in the 5th month after Renly arrived at Highgarden, a piece of news that everyone did not expect spread like a stormy wave and quickly spread throughout Westeros. The huge fleet of the Iron Islands took advantage of the cover of night to sneak into the coastal territory of the Lannister family in the west, raided the important city of Lannister Harbor, and burned a large number of warships anchored outside the port. The Western Navy was therefore abolished, and large tracts of coastline were left without armed defense, leaving the door wide open. The Iron Men began to use their ancient ways at will, and the smoke of war swept over everyone, catching them off guard. Chapter 136. News of this sudden rebellion touched the hearts of countless people, and even Renly, who never liked paying attention to such things, couldn't help but wonder whether his brother's rule would be shaken by this. Many lords who were hostile to Baratheon secretly watched to see how King Robert, who had usurped the Iron Throne, would deal with this sudden rebellion. The king's response was very simple. No hesitation, no negotiation, no talking about what was available and what was not. He directly summoned the lords and knights of the 7 kingdoms to go west to participate in the war and fight him. So the continent of Westeros has been turbulent recently. Aren't you worried at all, Renly? In a certain courtyard in the High Court, the brown-haired boy Vilas was leaning against a white marble column, looking thoughtfully at the black-haired boy sitting on the railing next to him reading a book. More than 5 months have made the High Court heir much ruder than he was at the beginning, but this also means that the relationship between the two has become closer. This is your brother's kingdom. I'm just a child. Renly replied without raising his head after hearing this. There's nothing you can do about it, so don't worry. This sounds childish, but if you think about it carefully, it makes sense. After several months of contact, Vilas believed that the boy in front of him was actually quite precocious in mind, and this also made a certain thought in his heart more active. If you could witness this war with your own eyes, I think you would feel more at ease, right? He said tentatively. It's hard to stay in the castle and wait for news. Well enough. Renly replied smoothly. A year ago, Robert was fighting outside, and we were besieged at Storm's End for a whole year. It was much worse than now. The brown-haired boy was a little speechless after hearing the words, then thought about it, and simply said bluntly, allowing the Ironborn to continue to wreak havoc will have a great impact on the future of the Reach, so my father is prepared to respond to His Majesty Robert's call. At present, we are summoning our vassals to join the battle. As he said that, seeing the boy's eyes break away from the book and looking at him, Willis said sincerely, I want to see this war with my own eyes. You know, Renly, I will become a knight sooner or later, and knights there is no escape from war. Then go, take the opportunity to gain some experience. Renly replied with a wink. Father doesn't allow me to go. He said there would be many dangers. The brown-haired boy replied helplessly. There are definitely dangers in war. Renly nodded in agreement. We had no food when we were at Storm's End, and many people almost starved to death. But I have analyzed it. If the war goes well, then we will naturally not be in danger. If it doesn't go well, then the Ironborn will be able to harass the West and the Reach at will. Even Highgarden cannot call it that it's safe. That seems to be the case. The black-haired boy replied blankly, and Vilas rolled his eyes upon hearing this. Renly, stop pretending to be stupid, can't you express your opinion? Studying together for a long time made him understand a lot about the boy in front of him, but he didn't believe that this guy was really as simple and naive as he appeared. What's your opinion? Don't you just want me to go with you to seduce your father? Renly had already seen through the other party's purpose, so he said unceremoniously, I tell you, that's impossible. You are the next heir of Highgarden, and I am a guest of the royal family. If something happens to you, what will happen to Highgarden? This is a big loss for me. If something happens to me, how do you think your father should explain it to my brother? The sudden change of tone was jarring, but Vilas was in high spirits. Don't you want to see the ocean and war? There are also the Iron Islands. I heard that the customs there are very unique. I've seen it before. It's nothing more than two groups of people fighting back and forth. It's just that the battlefield is replaced by the sea. Renly said casually, what about the Iron Islands? It's not much to see. It's a place where birds don't shit. Vilas thought he was bragging, or simply didn't want to care about himself, so he sighed, aren't you tired of staying in the castle all the time? The outside world is very exciting, and there are many things we don't understand. He is smart and mature, but he has little interest in most things and does not like to follow rules. He seems a bit lazy. This is Willis' understanding of Renly. But he likes some novel things, such as magic, or mysterious legends such as the Children of the Forest and the White Walkers. His curiosity is serious. Unfortunately, Willis didn't know that with the existence of a strange left hand, Renly had enough surprises and novelties in life, so he lacked interest in it. What the Duke said makes sense. War is very dangerous, and in a war at sea, the outcome cannot be determined by the number of people. The boy drooped his eyelids and said, so I still like to stay in the castle. It's the safest. And didn't you say a while ago that you wanted to go hunting? Leading dogs and flying eagles. I'm quite looking forward to this. The adventure in the dungeon world was enough to wipe out Renly's inner desire for adventure. In reality, he just wanted to live a quiet life, but he didn't want to live a life of constant twists and turns inside and outside the dungeon, worrying about his own safety all day long. That would be too much. Oh no. And he's still too young. However, what was of little interest to Renly was full of attractions for many young nobles who had never suffered setbacks since childhood, so the brown-haired boy did not give up. We don't actually need to go to the front line. We just need to be in the rear, with my father and Earl Redwyn. That way, unless the battle situation becomes one-sided, we won't be in any danger. Renly was unmoved by what he heard. My plan is to unite some friends of the same age to propose to my father, not just you and me. This way, the possibility of success is not small. Renly shrugged. Are you so timid? Renly, I don't think you are such a person. Willis used the provoking method. I'm just a kid, so of course I'm not very courageous. Renly said, lifting the book in his hand and making a gesture of concentrating on reading. But the other party still didn't give up, but slowly revealed many baits he had prepared in advance. They all say that there is the remains of a sea dragon on the Iron Islands. Sea dragon, it sounds very interesting. Don't you want to see it? Those followers who claim to be the sons of the drowned god seem to appear out of nowhere. No one has seen them before. Renly, aren't you curious? I heard that a big sea monster appeared in the Iron Islands a while ago, just like the one on the Greyjoy family's coat of arms. Grapevine is not trustworthy. Renly finally couldn't help but replied. Sailors always say they have seen mermaids, ice dragons, and even storm gods. I don't know if they have really seen them or if they saw them while they were drunk and sleeping. The mermaid doesn't understand. The brown-haired boy shook his head. A sea ghost appeared a while ago, and he even has a name. Oh, what's the name? Renly was surprised when he heard this. It was enough to just listen to news about ghosts. There were a lot of superstitious rumors in feudal society, but a ghost with a name seemed to have a certain degree of credibility, and he had not forgotten that there were actually supernatural forces in this world. Although rare, is not unheard of. I think it's Jaspi. The brown-haired boy replied. Many sailors on the west coast claim to have encountered it. It is said that the sea ghost will ask whoever he encounters how to get to Bayou village, and then disappear after asking. I don't know where the Bayou village he mentioned is. Jaspi? Bayou village? Renly frowned when he heard this, feeling that the two names seemed familiar. Chapter 137. The atmosphere became dull because of the last sentence, and then under Willis's surprised eyes, Renly pondered for a while, and finally agreed to his proposal. Why did you change your mind suddenly? He asked curiously. I'm going to see what the sea ghost looks like. Renly answered truthfully. White Gull Village, Jaspi. Although a long time has passed and the information is not very important to him, he still recalled what these two are from the corner of his memory. When he first entered the Drowned Man dungeon, a boy from the same village he met was called Jaspi, and his name at that time was Hal, who was born in White Gull Village. So the question is, why do people in the dungeon, or dead people, suddenly appear in the real world and become a so-called sea ghost? Is it because Jaspi turned into a sea ghost in the original history, or is there some change in this world that he doesn't understand? He couldn't help but think of the followers of the so-called son of the drowned god. This question seems very important, so Renly changed his mind. But before that, he needed to make many considerations and preparations. For example, if he really went out to sea, would the curse on his body take effect? For example, how to persuade Lord Tyrell to let him join. In his opinion, the brown-haired boy's plan of gathering for a petition had a very low chance of success, so Renly had no hope for it, or in other words, he would never leave the castle under normal circumstances, just like the treatment he received in King's Landing, so he could only use abnormal methods. Thinking thoughtfully, Renly said goodbye to Willis, who was happy because of his successful persuasion, and returned to his room in Highgarden Castle. After a moment's silence, he took out a piece of parchment he usually used for calligraphy practice from the bookcase, and found a dagger to cut it to the right size. Finally, the boy sat on the chair, picked up the feather pen on the desk, dipped it in the ink in the bottle, and began to write on the letter paper. At this time, the sky was approaching dusk, and the sunlight outside the window shone in through the translucent light green glass, which looked hazy and beautiful. The lines of pure black common language were bathed in light, looking like wonderful puzzles growing from the bottom of the hazy ocean. As he kept writing, the rustling sound of the feather pen rubbing against the paper continued, and the fine words gradually covered the entire piece of letter paper. Finally, the black-haired boy took out the Duke's seal of the crowned stag from his trash can, stained it with red sealing wax, and stamped it on the letter. Thus, a very realistic royal forged letter was made. I didn't expect that not changing the coat of arms would have such a benefit. Muttering softly, he temporarily dried the letter on the desk, and then sat on the carpet again without caring about his image, picked up the glass jar in the trash can, looked at the mouse breathing quietly inside. Renly took a deep breath, and then shook it vigorously. Seagulls, stumps, books. The black-haired boy stopped his hand with satisfaction only after it turned into a dull-headed crow. The next morning, in the room of the Maester Tower, the bald middle-aged Maester was teaching and inculcating relevant information about the outbreak of this war. King Corran, the father of the rebel leader Balon Greyjoy, is a unique leader of the Iron Islands. His ruling goal is to integrate the Iron Islands into the Seven Kingdoms. To this end, he not only hired maesters to serve in the Iron Islands, but also liberated all slaves in the Iron Islands. At the same time, he imposed heavy taxes on many vassals who forcibly took salt concubines, and actively participated in the Seven Kingdoms' external wars. This series of measures is contrary to the ancient customs of the Iron Islands. King Corran is obviously ready to abandon the ancient roads that the Ironmen once relied on for survival, and his wisdom and means are enough to suppress the dissatisfaction of his vassals. Unfortunately, before his ruling goal was achieved, he died in the war against the Shield Islands. The Maester said, sighing regretfully. The Shield Islands are a series of islands off the western coastline of Highgarden, guarding the river that connects to the sea under Highgarden Castle, that is, guarding the entire Highgarden and the Reach. During Robert's rebellion, the Iron Islands had been on the sidelines, and finally saw that the rebellion was basically certain to end in victory, so they belatedly sent a fleet to attack the Reach, Robert's original enemy, and caught the tail of the war. Unfortunately, their achievements were few and did not cause much impact on the Reach. King Corran, who wanted to abandon the ancient roads of the Iron Islands, also died in that war, so his eldest son, Balon Greyjoy, who admired the ancient roads more, inherited the throne of Seastone. Interestingly, the reason why King Corran participated in the war was instigated by his son. Cullen Greyjoy died in battle, and his eldest son Balon Greyjoy sat on the Seastone throne, but time was short and his foundation was unstable, so how could he gain the support of his subordinates after becoming the new king? Facing three students who were listening quietly, the bald Maester analyzed, a war that shows a completely different goal from his father's rule, will make those iron races who advocate the ancient ways fully support Balon. At the same time, His Majesty Robert was crowned not long ago, and the timing of the war seems to be just right. Cullen's peaceful rule has been long, and there should be many people who agree with his idea of integrating into the Seven Kingdoms, right? Brenly, who was listening quietly, suddenly asked, how did Balon convince those lords in a short period of time to give up Cullen's efforts and support him in launching a rebellion? This question involves the reason why the war broke out. Although Renly remembered that this war did exist, he felt that it should not have broken out so early. Moreover, due to the suspicion that arose yesterday, he always wondered whether all this had something to do with him. Idea, although he thought it didn't seem to make sense. He definitely needs to win the support of those people. The Iron Islands navy is very powerful, but that is only if all the Ironmen are united. If he cannot even appease his home base, then it would be particularly unreasonable to launch a war. It's too risky. Villas on the side also nodded in agreement. This question will have to be answered by Balan himself after our victory in the war. The bachelor said evasively, and then signaled the end of today's class. He actually couldn't think clearly about this question. My plan is already halfway through. I am currently preparing to contact the two brothers Brian and Edway of the Fossoway family. After the bald bachelor left, the brown-haired boy spoke to Renly in a low voice. Just call me when you want to petition, Renly replied. What are you talking about? The little fat man on the side felt vaguely like he was being squeezed out, but after the mysterious two looked at each other, they did not answer his question and instead walked out of the room. The little fat man pouted depressedly. On the other side, after finishing teaching, the bald bachelor Lomies was walking on the stone stairs to the crow room, thinking about his 3 students as he walked. Master Willis is still as smart as ever, and the young Duke of the Baratheon family has a vision and bright thinking that surprises him. The only one who needs more care is Master Garland, but Master Garland is the second son. I am too young now, so I don't need to learn more about certain things. Perhaps we should ask the Duke about this? Thinking about it, the bald bachelor paused in his steps due to the violent impact on his forehead. He looked up and found that he had arrived at the door of the crow room. In addition to being a doctor, the bachelor's daily work mainly involves raising ravens and sending and receiving letters. Apart from that, teaching is just a secondary task. Therefore, Bachelor Lomies went to the crow room a lot every day, and he would come there after every teaching session. After raising his hand to rub his painful forehead, the bald bachelor took out the door key and unlocked the door. A chaotic sound of shouting and shouting immediately hit his face. Looking around, there are rows of cages of dung-stained crows in the brightly lit messy room. Now there are countless little black eyes staring at me in the cages, and a few of them are shouting bald, bald, bald unscrupulously. If I find out which annoying guy taught you this, I'll have to shave his head. He murmured, and suddenly saw an unfamiliar raven standing blankly on the table by the window not far away. The petite body made him feel a little strange, but the symbol tied to the raven's leg made the bald man the maester recognized it at once. The bird came from King's Landing. What other orders does the king have? Or is it a message from Grand Maester Pycelle? He secretly guessed. After stepping closer, he caught this unusually honest raven in his hands and pulled the raven's legs with a strange mentality. Pull out the letter tied to it. He opened the letter and squinted at it. After a moment, the bald bachelor couldn't help but frown. What a ridiculous decision. Shaking his head, he put the letter away, then locked the honest raven in an empty cage, and hurriedly left the place, preparing to report the matter to the Duke. Chapter 138. In the bright and fragrant garden of High Court, the bald bachelor left quietly after finishing his report, while the Duke and Duchess sat face to face at the stone table and talked. The Duke of Mace, who had brown curly hair and was dressed in fine clothes, held the letter in his hand and was lost in thought. The silver-haired woman sitting opposite frowned and said, I don't agree with you taking Renly with you when setting sail this time. Mace, that's too dangerous. I don't agree either. The Duke of Metz nodded, but this is His Majesty's request. There is nothing we can do if we don't agree. The child is not yet 7 years old. Mrs. Ellery reminded him. The brown-haired Duke chuckled at this. Perhaps it is the tradition of the Stormlands to never miss any opportunity to educate children since they were young. The silver-haired Lady Ellery sighed. What a bunch of savages. About this. The Duke of Metz coughed dryly after hearing this, and warned, spiders are not only weaving webs in King's Landing, some things are better not to be said clearly. When did you have to be so careful in your own garden? Mrs. Ellery complained dissatisfiedly, what else can we say? Isn't that what happened in the Mad King era? The Duke of Metz sneered, originally, I thought that Spider would be beheaded or driven away after His Majesty Robert came to power, but unexpectedly he kept his position. He said, shaking his head with some regret. Such a pity. I still think it would be very risky to let Renly follow. Lady Ellery changed the topic and said, the child seems to be relatively healthy, but he was already weak and sick in King's Landing. What if he gets sick on the ship? I'll take the maester with me. The Duke replied, if the maester doesn't work, then it's not my fault. Write a letter and let His Majesty Robert consider it carefully, Mace. Lady Ellery suggested, this is too reckless. Write a letter for such a trivial matter. The Duke of Metz disagreed with this approach. And even if you write a letter, there is no time. His Majesty Robert should have left King's Landing by now. Whenever there is a war, he always likes to be at the forefront. Speaking of this, he suddenly remembered that his eldest son had claimed not long ago that he wanted to follow him to see it, so he said thoughtfully, "You said, since His Majesty Robert is so relieved, how about I give way a bring Lars with you so that he can gain some knowledge?" Mace Tyrell is actually a man with a big heart, and he always hopes that his eldest son can become a top knight and an excellent ruler. As a ruler, you must understand war. So he is also somewhat moved now. No, Vilas must not follow. After hearing this, the Duchess said without hesitation, "One is enough of a risk, you want two. We need to take Renly's kid with us on both sides. Why don't we ask Willis to come with us so that they can keep us company? This isn't like going out hunting. I think we are basically guaranteed to win this battle and there will be no danger." The Duke of Metz explained. "That's not okay." The brown-haired boy Vilas didn't know that his only chance to follow had been ruined by his mother, and now he was persuading two teenagers of the same age who were guests in the castle. He obviously couldn't imagine that someone had deviated from his plan and swept the snow in front of him. In the quiet room, Renly sighed as he stared at the slightly reserved and thin boy in front of him. Who would have thought that this little guy who was kidnapped with a golden dragon would be so proficient in unlocking and stealing? Pretend to be a letter from King's Landing, then enter the Maester's tower under the leadership of Renly, the spy, to listen, and sneak to the crow room on the top floor to send the bird in when the Maester and servants are not paying attention. A qualified forgery incident was successfully completed. Although Renly could still achieve his goal without the boy named Tob, it would be much simpler this way. "You follow me in again tomorrow morning and steal the bird back." What he was thinking in his heart did not affect Renly's words on the surface. As he spoke, he patted the other person on the shoulder and praised, "Well done." The boy was encouraged and blushed a little, then hesitantly said, "Sir, can I come with you?" He vaguely knew that this adult might be going out, but he didn't know the specific situation. "No." Renly said negatively after hearing this, "Your task now is to stay in the castle and receive training." "But Mother said, I have to follow you closely." "My lord now orders you to stay here." Renly replied, and the other party bowed his head and said no more. The boy's mother is not in the castle at the moment, but is active near the High Garden. The reason is that being a female guard is too eye-catching, and being a maid is too restrictive, so it is better to be the eyes and ears outside, so that nothing can be done. "Notify Renly immediately." Renly thought what she said made sense, so he just let it go, but he didn't think he could get much help from having such an ear and eyes. Unless someone attacks Highgarden, the hinterland of the river, or Highgarden rebels against Baratheon, even if there are ears and eyes, it will be of no use at all. The female bandit whom Renly thought was useless was actually very useful, if she could truthfully report the gossip she heard while on the road a while ago. Of course, even if it wasn't so, she was actually very useful. For example, at this moment, she suddenly saw a strange woman who was asking about her little master. "Under 7 years old, are you sure?" In a deserted hotel 4 or 5 days away from High Court, a woman in a black cloak was talking to the hotel owner with a hoarse and strange voice. "I'm not sure about this. I just said that the little duke should be less than 7 years old." The fat owner replied. "Blue eyes, black hair. Yes, those eyes are beautiful." The fat proprietress sighed, "I have seen many children, but this is the first time I have seen a child with such beautiful eyes." "You don't know, ma'am, he even greeted me politely. He said, 'May the warrior bless your health, ma'am.' To be honest, this is the most sincere blessing I have ever heard in my life." "Where does he live now?" "Where else can it be?" The proprietress of the inn replied, "Of course he lives in our Lord Tyrell's castle. Let me tell you, ma'am, such a beautiful and polite child should live in such a beautiful place. Ordinary people like us, how can we have the qualifications?" The woman nodded, raised her hand to leave a few copper coins, and turned to leave. She had a black hood on her head, so her appearance could not be seen clearly, but when she turned around, a strand of shining silver hair was revealed. Wenda in the corner narrowed her eyes when she saw this, then got up and followed her out. Although she didn't hear any specific purpose, since this person wanted to inquire about her master, it was obviously not a casual question. Wenda was ready to follow and stare at him. If he asked her or followed her, she would just act accordingly. However, when she walked out of the hotel, she suddenly found that the strange woman had disappeared. How is this possible? Frowning and scanning the wilderness dirt road in front of the hotel, the female bandit was secretly stunned, but before she could think about it, she suddenly felt a huge impact behind her head, and then her eyes went black, and she knew nothing. Chapter 139. The war that broke out suddenly left no room for buffering. On the third day after the royal letter arrived, the knights and soldiers of Highgarden, who were ready to go, boarded the large number of transport ships anchored in the river outside the castle one by one. It was not convenient to wear heavy armor during a naval battle, but if the war went well, there would be a land battle, so the knights still wore their own plate armor. Even Duke Tyrell was no exception. The core team boarded the ship under the leadership of the majestic Duke of the Reach. As the spectator designated by His Majesty the King, Renly, the little guy, was also in the ranks, but before boarding the ship, he faced a trouble. "You don't care about our friendship, Renly." The brown-haired boy Willis, who came to see him off, spoke with a look of resentment. "It was obviously me who proposed it first, how could you leave me alone and go?" His petition plan was aborted because the Duchess personally talked to him about this matter the night before, and Willis had to compromise in the end. "It's just that I failed, but the person who was reluctant to join at first actually succeeded. I can't help it." Renly blinked and replied, "This is all your father's decision." "Then why didn't you include me in the letter when you forged it?" Willis didn't know Renly's forgery process, but he knew that the sudden letter must be fake, so the result was not difficult to guess. "It would be too strange to include you, and it would cause your father's dissatisfaction." Renly answered seriously, then tiptoed and patted the other person's shoulder. "Stay in Highgarden with peace of mind, I wish you a good time in the hunting operation in the near future. I will also tell you the details of the war when I come back. Don't think about me hiding this for you," Willis said dissatisfiedly. "I believe you will." Renly replied with a smile, and then ignored the expression of this person, stepped onto the ship, and hurried towards the arranged cabin room under the guidance of the guard. At the same time, he began to think silently about this voyage in his mind. Soon, the transport ships anchored on the riverbank will sail along the river called the Mander River toward the west coast. Their destination is to go to the Shield Islands off the west coast to meet with the River Bay lords there. And Renly's accompanying stage is limited to this, or in other words, he has no intention of staying in the fleet all the time. His goal is just to find the rumored Jasper, not to watch the war, and the curse on him also makes him dare not really follow the fleet to sail in the ocean. Otherwise, if the storm is really summoned, the war will really be lost. On the stone bridge, watching the slowly receding ship, Willis Tyrell felt complicated. On the one hand, he was depressed that he, the initiator, was abandoned in the territory, and on the other hand, he was surprised by Renly's unexpected method. As a precocious nobleman, Willis was smart and studious. He knew what path he would take in the future, so he had clear goals. Although he had proposed to follow the army out before, it was because of the curiosity of a teenager, but the main purpose was to gain some corresponding knowledge for himself. As for the black-haired boy, although his precocity surprised him a little, he also knew that he had no ambition and was lazy. In daily conversations, he had no mature plans and ideas for his future career as a lord. He seemed to be no different from those guys who relied on their status to get by. But when the problem arose, the little guy who he thought was just idling away actually ran away at a much faster speed than him, while he, who thought he had mature thoughts, could only stand there and look at the other person's back stupidly. "What's wrong with you, Willis?" The little fat man in green clothes tugged at the corner of the brown-haired boy's clothes who was thinking with his head down, and asked curiously, "Are you reluctant to leave your father?" "Nothing, Garland." The brown-haired boy sighed and said, "I suddenly feel that I still have a lot to learn." This made the little fat man understand vaguely. "You mean learning to identify the stars in the sky? There are so many stars in the sky, of course you have a lot to learn. Astronomy is just a personal hobby, I mean other aspects." As they were talking, the two brothers and the farewell team had already returned to the castle. The atmosphere in the castle became a little deserted that night. Without the annoying guy who played the harp and harassed him every day, the brown-haired boy who practiced lance charging felt quite at a loss. So he finished his practice early before it got dark, wiped his sweat, and walked towards the bachelor's tower. It was not time yet, so he planned to read a book before going to dinner. But before Willis could reach the bachelor's tower, he suddenly saw a stranger appear in his sight. It was a woman who was talking to a maid. She was tall and slender, with her back to him. Her long silver hair draped over a black cloak reminded Willis of his mother subconsciously, but upon closer inspection, the hair color was not quite the same as his mother's. Who is this? A sense of curiosity rose in Willis' heart, and at the same time, as if she noticed his gaze, the woman in the black cloak suddenly turned around and looked at him. It was a delicate yet strange face. At first glance, it looked very young and beautiful. But when I looked at it again, I seemed to see an old man who had experienced many vicissitudes of life. In the dim light, a pair of deep blue eyes seemed to be full of tough aggression, which made the brown-haired boy who had not experienced any storms nervous. However, he was not nervous for long. The man turned around and walked away quickly, disappearing from sight in a few breaths. Who was that just now? Willis looked dazed for a moment, and finally stopped the maid to ask. It was someone from the lady's family. The maid replied. My mother's relatives, why don't I know? Willis was stunned when he heard it. This. The maid looked at this blankly. I don't know, young master, but if she is not from the lady's family, how did she enter the castle? Willis' heart sank when he heard it, and he hurriedly asked, what did she say to you? Ask about Lord Renly's personality, appearance, temper, and whether he has any quirks. The maid replied. Besides that. And ask where he went. The maid said, and asked carefully, did I get into trouble, young master? No, maybe I didn't know someone from my mother's family was coming. Willis answered comfortingly, he didn't want to cause any panic in the castle or let some gossip spread. The maid felt relieved after hearing this, and the brown-haired boy asked again, did she say what her name was? No. The maid thought about it and answered, but seeing that her young master frowned, she added, but I saw that the lady's eyes seemed to be purple. Chapter 140. The river named Mandar River flows directly to the sea in the west and to the east into the vast land of the River Bay. The river is wide and the water flows at a moderate speed. It is the largest river in the River Bay. The Ironmen once relied on this to take boats into the River Bay and plunder the banks of the Mandar River. This trend was not curbed until the ancient River Bay royal family armed the 4 sea islands at the western estuary. The 4 islands were later collectively called the Shield Islands. For countless years, they protected the River Bay and Highgarden from being invaded by the Ironmen. It is a major strategic location. At dawn, before the morning light appeared, a large number of troops from Highgarden arrived at Green Shield Island, the closest to the mainland among the Shield Islands. The local ruling family, Chesta, solemnly welcomed the Duke of Mace and his party, and also prepared shelter and food. So before dawn, the island was already noisy, with fire reaching the sky. The soldiers and knights who finally arrived at their destination were very energetic at the moment. As the leader, Mace Tyrell stood on the castle watchtower of the Chesta family and had a heated military discussion with a group of vassals around him. Then when their meeting was over, Renly, who had taken a nap in the castle, suddenly came to the door. Standing on the top of the watchtower, the others had already gone down the tower. The black-haired boy said to the tall Duke of Mace with a serious face, I think my joining is completely a nuisance to you, Lord Mace. Oh? Why do you say that? The Duke of Mace, who was busy with work but was stopped by a child and was impatient, was stunned when he heard the words. This is obvious. Renly said while spreading his palm and turning it over to indicate. I'm so young, I can't stand the long journey, Brother Robert is really inconsiderate. The boy's blunt words seemed a little dissatisfied, and the Duke, who thought the same thing, subconsciously nodded, then reacted and coughed dryly, and said, maybe His Majesty thinks that this war will not be lost, Renly, so he hopes you can learn something from it. But at least he should ask my personal opinion first. The boy frowned and replied. Seeing this, the Duke of Mace thought he was a little scared, so he comforted him, don't worry, Renly, there will be no accidents. Stay in the cabin with servants serving you, which is no different from being in Highgarden. No, Lord Mace. Renly said, I still think my existence is a trouble, so I thought of a solution. Solution? The Duke of Mace was stunned again when he heard it. What is it? Send me a merchant ship. Renly answered with a childlike innocence, they all say merchant ships can't participate in the war, and I see there are many such ships anchored by the island. It's better to put me on them instead of following the warships. Merchant ships have no resistance. After hearing this, the Duke laughed dumbly, it's safer to be with me. But when the war really starts, merchant ships don't need to join the battle. Renly looked at him hopefully and said, you can ask this ship not to follow the army and go around near the coast. In this way, I can also participate in the war. If there is danger, we will run to the land. No, no. The Duke of Mace shook his head, I can't explain to your brother if you are so perfunctory. Just say what I asked. Renly said seriously, or I fell ill halfway and had to leave the fleet and return to land for treatment. Robert can't blame you for this, right? This way. The Duke was moved by what he said. It is inconvenient to bring a child with you during a war, and this child is the king's younger brother. If something unexpected happens, it will be troublesome. And if we really do this, it seems to be a solution. This child is very sensible, but his ideas are not mature. The Duke laughed secretly and said, I have a better suggestion, Renly. What is it? The boy blinked. You should pretend to be sick and stay on the island. Even if you run into Lord Robert, I will have a legitimate reason to explain your absence. But my brother is likely to come here. Renly said embarrassedly, I'm not really sick. When he sees me jumping around, he will be furious. Besides, it's not very safe here. Without waiting for the other party to answer, Renly said again, I heard that the port of Lannister near Casterly Rock was attacked. If it's not safe here, then other places are even more unsafe. Lord Mace waved his hand and said, if it's really unsafe, you can also retreat back to Highgarden. Don't worry, Renly, I will make arrangements before leaving. This made Renly sigh, and then said, okay, sir, I actually want to go around, otherwise I'll be bored to death if I stay in the castle all the time. It's not safe to go around during the war. Lord Mace shook his head. It's only in the sea around a few castles along the coast. I don't think there will be any problem. Renly said, if we really encounter the Ironmen, the worst that can happen is to run back to the land. Does this kid really think that the Ironmen can only move on the sea? The Duke laughed dumbly when he heard this. I'll think about it, Renly, and give you an answer before I leave. Okay. Renly sighed and said with a little disappointment, may the warriors bless you with victory. The Duke of Mace smiled and thanked him. The boy then turned around and walked down the watchtower ladder. The look of disappointment on his face faded away, and he thought as he walked. Think about it and give you an answer later. This kind of statement is basically a rejection, and Renly was actually mentally prepared for this before he spoke. The most ideal situation is that Mace Tyrell agrees to his proposal and sends a merchant ship to resettle him, so that Renly can freely pursue his goal, but obviously the Duke is not stupid enough to send an important person to him. The guests carelessly left them aside and wandered around. But this conversation basically achieved Renly's purpose. Stay on this island. Yes, this is actually his goal, or the basic goal. Due to the existence of the curse, Renly cannot join the large army, so this step is necessary. But at the same time, he didn't want to give up the original purpose of going out this time. Find out about the sea ghost Jaspi. So he still has to find a way to escape from the island. Renly doesn't have any idea about this yet, but he feels that it is not difficult. As for other things, such as his own safety, he was not worried at all. On this trip, Renly was only concerned about the curse. Regarding this war, or this war taking place in the ocean, he did not think that his safety would be threatened. In a sense, the ocean is his home field. Here Renly was thinking about his own affairs, and over there in the island port area, a short-haired woman who was woken up and walked out of the cabin, with an impatient face, narrowed her eyes unconsciously when she saw this large group of people coming.